Hello everyone, I'm the DreamTeller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I'm not someone who scares easily, but I knew something was wrong the first night I slept in my new apartment. I'd spent almost a year saving up to move out of the cramped studio I used to live in. I wanted more space, a better neighborhood, and a sense of progress in my life. When I signed the lease on this second floor place, I felt proud of myself. It was a big step up from where I'd been. The apartment was an older construction, but it had a certain charm. The hallways were wide, the ceilings were high, and the floors were real wood. I liked the vintage feel when I first toured it, even though a part of me noticed a faint smell of old paint or must. I thought it was normal for an older building. On my first night, I fell asleep without much trouble because I was exhausted from moving all my stuff. I had boxes stacked in every corner and I hadn't even set up my bed frame yet. I basically threw a mattress on the floor, put some blankets on it, and crashed. I remember waking up around 3 in the morning. I didn't see anything unusual at first. It was just dark and quiet. I rolled over, thinking I would drift back to sleep, but I heard something in the corridor outside my apartment door. It sounded like heavy footsteps, almost like someone wearing boots. It had a steady rhythm, like a march or a patrol. Thump, 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 thump. I sat up, listening. The footsteps were slow, but they definitely weren't normal footsteps you hear in a hallway. Usually people hurry or shuffle. These were deliberate, one foot hitting the floor after the other with a firm strike. At first, I assumed it was a neighbor. Maybe someone has a weird schedule, or maybe it was a security guard. But I hadn't seen any security guard in this building, just a landlord who lived in a different place across town. Also, these footsteps went on for too long. They didn't fade out like someone walking from one end of the hall to the other. It was like they paced back and forth. I got out of bed, walked to my door, and looked through the peephole. The hall was lit by this cheap overhead light that was always on. I didn't see anyone there. I waited a few seconds, feeling my heart pound in my chest. The hallway stayed empty, but I kept hearing that footstep sound. I pressed my ear closer to the door. It sounded so real, like it was right on the other side, but the peephole showed absolutely nothing. I decided to ignore it. I thought maybe I was groggy, or it was some weird noise from the pipes. I locked both my deadbolt and the regular lock, then went back to my mattress. After a while, the footsteps stopped. I stayed awake for at least an hour, straining my ears, but eventually, I fell asleep again. The next morning, I laughed about it a bit. I figured I was tired and my mind played tricks on me. I spent the day unpacking. I set up my couch, my TV, and put my dishes away. I tried to forget that strange sound. That second night, I stayed up late watching TV. I was still arranging furniture, so there were lots of boxes around. I wasn't fully settled, but the living room looked decent enough to relax in. At around midnight, I turned off the TV and decided to grab a quick shower before bed. The bathroom is connected to my bedroom by a short hallway. When I opened my bedroom door, I noticed the hallway light outside my apartment flickering under the bottom edge of my front door. I paused for a second, watching the light. It seemed like someone was blocking the light on and off, like a person passing in front of it. I thought maybe a neighbor was walking by, but the shadow kept pausing right in front of my door. The flickering was too slow and deliberate. It made me uneasy. I stood there holding my bedroom doorknob, waiting for the shadow to move away. It wouldn't budge. I moved closer to the front door. My heart pounded and I felt my palms get sweaty. I'm a grown man, but something about that shadow made me nervous. I reached for the chain lock just to make sure it was secure. Suddenly, the doorknob on my side jiggled. It moved so fast, like someone on the other side was trying to open it. I yanked my hand back. For a moment, I froze. Then I grabbed the knob myself, holding it still. It kept twisting against my grip. I didn't hear any voice or breathing on the other side. I just felt raw force on the knob. After several seconds, it stopped. I stood there, not sure what to do next. I looked through the peephole again. No one was there. The hallway looked empty, and the light wasn't flickering anymore. I felt a tightness in my chest, but I told myself it was probably some prank. I tried to calm down and remind myself I was safe inside. That night I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking I heard something out in the living room or the hallway. Every little creak or pop in the building made me jump. Eventually I dozed off around 3 or 4 in the morning. When I got up the next day, I noticed I had a bruise on my left forearm. It was purple and shaped almost like a handprint, but I couldn't be sure. It just looked like a circular mark with some faint finger-like outlines. I poked at it and it hurt. It didn't make any sense to me because I didn't remember banging my arm on anything. I tried to recall if I'd carried a heavy box or something that might have pressed against my arm, but nothing came to mind. My apartment was still a mess though, so I thought maybe I knocked it on a table corner. I brushed it off as a random injury. Things got weirder that night. I was in bed scrolling on my phone. I had the hallway light in my apartment off, but the light from the main corridor outside still crept in through the bottom of the door. Around 1 a.m., I heard the footsteps again. They had that same deliberate, heavy quality as before. I sat up in bed, holding my phone tight. I stared at my door, half expecting the knob to start turning on its own again. I felt my heart rate spike, and my mouth got dry. I waited. This time, the footsteps moved closer to my door, then continued along the hallway. It sounded like they reached the end, and then turned around. Every time they passed my door, I held my breath. My skin prickled with a hot, tense feeling. I wanted to jump up, fling the door open, and confront whoever it was. But I was terrified of what I might see out there. After maybe 10 minutes of this back and forth pacing, I heard a thump on my door. Just one single thump. It wasn't loud like a kick. It sounded like a firm knock or something hitting it from the other side. I got off the bed slowly. I walked to the door as silently as I could. I brought my eye to the peephole, but again, nothing was out there. The hallway was empty. No person. No shape. No shadow. I touched the door. It was cool to the touch, but I thought I felt the faintest vibration, like a residual energy. I know it sounds strange, but it was like the door still had a slight shake to it. I stood there for a long time, just staring through the peephole. Finally, I whispered to myself, "There's no one there." I went back to bed, but I didn't really sleep. I kept the blankets around me and listened. The footsteps faded after a while. I must have passed out from sheer exhaustion around dawn. In the morning, I checked the hallway. Everything looked normal. The overhead light was steady, no flickering. The hallway was empty, no scuff marks from boots, nothing. I found myself feeling uneasy all day. My appetite was off, and I kept checking my forearm bruise, which was getting darker. I decided to check in with a neighbor, but the apartments on my floor seemed empty, or at least quiet. I knocked on the door next to mine around noon, but nobody answered. I knocked a few times and even stood there for a minute. No noise from inside. I didn't want to wander the whole building knocking on random doors, so I let it go. Over the next few nights, the same pattern repeated. Around midnight or later, I'd hear that steady boot-like stomp in the hallway. Sometimes it would pass by my door once. Other times it seemed to linger. I got into the habit of turning off every light in my apartment and sitting in the dark, listening. My mind felt like it was on constant alert. I'd hear the footsteps, feel my breathing get faster, and fight the urge to hide in my closet like a little kid. Instead, I just sat there, wide-eyed, gripping my phone, ready to dial 911 if something crazy happened. But I never saw anyone. Sometimes I'd see a shadow block the light beneath the door. Sometimes the doorknob would jiggle. It always felt like someone was out there, but whenever I looked, it was empty. One night, I tried a different tactic. I turned off all my lights and waited in the living room with my phone camera running, aimed at the front door. I sat on a chair, leaning forward, just waiting to capture any proof. I heard the footsteps start around 1:30 a.m. They were slow, in that same rhythmic pattern. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel my pulse in my ears. I watched the door closely. At one point, I saw the faint outline of a shape under the door, like a person blocking the hallway light. The doorknob rattled again. I zoomed my phone's camera in a bit, but in the low light, all I got was a blurry image. I couldn't see any detail. It was just a dark shape. Then it moved away. I didn't have the courage to fling the door open and confront it. After a few weeks of this, I started to dread the nights. I'd go to bed earlier, hoping that if I fell asleep, maybe I wouldn't notice the noises. But I always woke up around the same time, with that tight feeling in my chest. Some nights I would just hear the pacing. Other nights I'd hear a faint knock or the doorknob turn. A couple of times I woke up with new bruises. One was on my thigh, and another one was near my shoulder. Each time they were in spots that didn't make sense for normal bumps or accidents. They were roundish bruises that hurt to touch. It made me wonder if something was happening to me while I slept, but I had no memory of anything. I tried complaining to the building manager, who told me nobody else had reported anything like this. He gave me a concerned look, like maybe I was paranoid or had an overactive imagination. He came by one afternoon, checked my door, tested the locks, and shrugged. He said everything looked fine. I could tell he thought I was just stressed. I wished I could show him proof of the footsteps, but every recording I took was basically silence or the faint sound of footsteps with no visible person. I considered moving out, but I'd spent so much money just to get in here. Plus, I didn't have another place lined up. I also felt stubborn, like I shouldn't have to give up my new apartment because of some strange phenomenon. So I stayed. I tried to live with it. I bought some extra locks for my door and installed them myself, including a chain lock and another latch. I slept with earplugs sometimes, or with headphones playing white noise. That cut down on my ability to hear the footsteps, but it didn't stop the bruises. I still woke up occasionally with a sore spot that I couldn't explain. Last night was one of the worst. I went to bed around midnight after double-checking all my locks. Sometime in the early hours, I stirred. I felt this deep sense of dread before I even opened my eyes. When I did, I realized I was lying on my side facing the bedroom door. The door was open, even though I always shut it. In the doorway, I saw a shape. It wasn't completely solid, but it blocked a good amount of the faint light from the living room. I froze. I felt my heart hammering in my chest. My mouth went dry, and my breathing turned shallow. I tried to move, but my arms and legs felt stiff. I managed to blink, and when I did, the shape seemed to shift backward, disappearing around the corner into the hallway. I felt this surge of adrenaline and jumped out of bed. I rushed to the door, flicked on the bedroom light, and then flipped the living room switch. Nobody was there. The front door was locked. The chain was still in place. I stood there, shaking, with my arms tense at my sides. That brings me to now. I'm sitting in my living room, all the lights on, feeling completely on edge. My body is worn out, and I've got this persistent ache in my forearm from the bruise that's still healing. I keep checking the hallway through the peephole. It's quiet at the moment. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to pack up and find another place, no matter how much it costs. Another part of me wonders if there's some logical explanation. Maybe I'm sleepwalking. Maybe there's some weird neighbor messing with me. But I can't deny the bruises or the fact that I've heard that marching sound so many times. Right now, I'm just hoping I'll make it through another night without waking up to a locked door swinging open or footsteps right outside my bedroom. I'm tired, but I can't bring myself to lie down. I keep thinking I'll hear that thumping, those slow, methodical boots in the hallway any minute now, and I'm not sure how much more of this I can handle. I noticed the noise on my very first night. I had just unlocked my new apartment, dumped my bag near the door, and kicked off my shoes when I heard a thumping sound overhead. It sounded like people stomping around in heavy boots. At first, I thought it was just the neighbor above me, but then I remembered. The landlord said I was on the top floor. There wasn't supposed to be anyone up there. I shrugged it off as old pipes or maybe the wind. The building looked ancient, with cracked ceilings and paint chipping off the walls. I wasn't in the mood to investigate. So I sat on my secondhand couch, turned on the TV, and tried to relax. But the thumping continued, mixed with what sounded like muffled music. It reminded me of a party behind a closed door. I raised the volume on the TV, thinking it would help me block out the noise. It didn't. The dull bass beat rattled in my ears, and something inside me felt unsettled. The next morning, I woke up groggy. My sleep had been restless because that party noise, or whatever it was, lasted until I finally passed out around midnight. My shift at work started at 8, so I rushed through a quick shower and headed out. On my way down the stairs, I ran into a neighbor, a middle-aged woman who was collecting her mail from a box in the lobby. She gave me a polite nod and I introduced myself. Her name was Dora. I asked her if she heard anything strange at night. She stared at me for a moment before saying, "You're in 501, right?" I nodded. She paused, then said, "Yeah, people hear things up there sometimes. I don't know much, but it's an old building." She sounded like she wanted to say more, but didn't. I tried to ask a follow-up question, but she just gave a small shrug and walked away. I went to work feeling curious, but decided to let it go. Maybe I was just imagining it, or maybe it was the wind blowing across the roof. I had a busy day ahead, and I didn't want to get spooked by a few noises. Still, by the time I clocked out, I felt a knot in my stomach. I was tired and wanted to sleep well. I hoped it would be quiet when I got home. That evening, I climbed the stairs because the old elevator was acting up again. The building was dim, with half the hallway lights flickering. The concrete steps echoed under my feet. When I reached my door, I paused. There was a low thump above me, like someone shifting furniture. I felt a sudden chill even though the corridor was stuffy. I went inside and closed the door. I tried to stay calm. After making a quick dinner, just a microwave burrito, I settled on the couch. The TV was off. I listened. Sure enough, muffled voices drifted down, along with what seemed like clinking glass. It made me think of people toasting or cheering. My palms felt clammy, and my stomach tightened. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and pushed it against my living room wall. Carefully, I climbed up to place my ear against the ceiling. The paint smelled musty, and I detected a faint odor of burnt wood. The voices were still there, but I couldn't make out any actual words, just a general buzz. Once in a while, there was laughter, short bursts that cut off abruptly. I climbed down, feeling uneasy. My heart pounded, and my mouth went dry. I told myself it was just the old pipes or some weird acoustic trick, but deep down I wasn't convinced. After another night of poor sleep, I decided to check out the rooftop. I figured maybe there was some hidden room or some old storage area that people were using. So on Saturday morning, I woke up early, put on some sneakers, and made my way to the narrow staircase at the end of the hall. A sign on the door read, "Roof access, authorized personnel only," but I pushed it open anyway. It creaked loudly and a rush of cold air hit me. The roof was empty, just a flat surface with some ventilation units, a few broken chairs, and a lot of bird droppings. Gray clouds hung low in the sky. The walls were dingy, covered in graffiti. I walked around slowly, listening for any signs of life. Nothing. The wind whipped past my ears. I tapped my foot on different spots, hoping to find some hatch or hollow area. All I got were dull thuds. After 10 minutes, I headed back down. My heart was racing, but I didn't find anything that explained the noise. When I got back inside, I felt something behind me. I turned and saw Dora standing in the hallway. She looked concerned. "Were you on the roof?" she asked, eyeing me. I nodded and told her I heard strange noises above my ceiling, so I wanted to see if anyone was messing around up there. Her expression softened. She leaned in a bit and said in a hushed tone, "This building used to have 6 floors. The top one caught fire a few decades ago. They tore it down, but people say the parties never stopped." I felt a jolt in my chest when she said that. I asked her if she'd ever heard them. She nodded. "Sometimes late at night you can hear it. People laughing, glasses clinking, music, like some old party on repeat." She scratched at her arm and glanced around like she was worried someone might overhear. "I don't know if you believe in that sort of thing, but trust me, You're not the first person who's heard it. I've lived here for 15 years, and every new tenant on the top floor either leaves after a few months or just learns to live with it. I swallowed hard. I could feel sweat forming on the back of my neck. Something about her tone felt honest. She wasn't trying to scare me. She was just laying out the facts. I thanked her and went back to my apartment, feeling uneasy. My hands shook when I unlocked my door. The smell of dust and old wood overwhelmed me. I sat on the couch and just stared at the ceiling. I couldn't hear anything right then, but I knew it would start up again later. Over the next week, the noises continued almost every evening. Sometimes it was a faint conversation that faded in and out. Other times it sounded like a full-blown gathering with music. The odd part was that it never sounded modern. The music had a scratchy, tin-like quality, and the voices had a certain echo, like they were in a bigger room than my apartment. My sleep got worse. I started getting tension headaches from clenching my jaw so much. Every night, my muscles would tense up as soon as I heard that first thump or burst of laughter. One night, I decided to record it with my phone. I sat there in the dark, phone mic pointed at the ceiling, waiting. Around 11 p.m., the familiar low beat of music started. I pressed record and tried to hold the phone steady. My heart thumped hard. I could feel each beat in my chest. The laughter seemed to spread across the ceiling, moving from one side to the other. I bit my lip and tried to keep my breathing quiet. After a few minutes, I stopped recording and played it back. But all I heard was static. There was a faint hum, but it was nowhere near what I heard with my own ears. That made my hands shake even more. It felt unreal, like the sound was there, but it refused to be captured. I got so frustrated that I slammed my fist on the coffee table. The echo of my punch felt pathetic. I realized I was basically alone in this. I didn't think the cops would believe me if I called to complain. I couldn't even prove it existed. I didn't know if I should talk to the landlord or if he would just shrug it off. The tension in my chest built up every night, and my patience wore thin. About 2 weeks later, I asked Dora again if there was any record of the fire or any old newspaper articles. She shrugged and said, "I don't keep track of that stuff, but the lady in 203 might know more." So I knocked on 203, and an older man answered. Apparently, the apartment belonged to his sister, who was out shopping. I politely asked if he knew anything about the building's past, and he invited me in for a quick chat. We stood in his living room, which smelled like old books and coffee. He told me that the top floor burned down in the late 1950s. He wasn't sure of the year. He said the entire floor was gutted, and the owners decided not to rebuild, so they just left it at 5 floors. He didn't mention any casualties, just said there was an accident with some faulty wiring. I asked if he ever heard anything at night. He paused, then gave me a long look. "Yes, I have," he said quietly. "But I mind my own business. This place is cheap and I don't like to stir trouble." Back in my apartment, I stood near the window. The city lights twinkled outside and a cool breeze drifted in. My mind wouldn't settle. My chest felt heavy and I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of some leftover echo. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but the noises were there. They felt real enough to keep me from sleeping. Even my appetite was getting worse. Some nights I just drank a glass of water and tried to pass out early, hoping the sounds wouldn't start before midnight. Then came a Saturday night when the noises got louder than ever. I was sitting at my small dining table, flipping through some magazines, when the ceiling above me suddenly thumped like someone dropped a heavy box. I jumped in my seat and almost knocked over the chair. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. I stood up slowly. The noise continued. Muffled voices, a clinking sound, and then a burst of upbeat music. It actually sounded clearer this time, like it was coming through a speaker right above my head. I walked into the center of the living room, staring upward, waiting for something else to happen. My throat felt dry. I could feel each breath going in and out, shallow and shaky. I grabbed a flashlight from my kitchen drawer. Even though I'd been up on the roof before, something inside me said I had to check again, right at that moment. Maybe I'd catch whoever was up there. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself out the door. The hallway was silent except for the hum of the old ceiling light. I walked to the same metal door marked roof access. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. I turned it slowly. It creaked open, and a blast of cool night air hit my face. I stepped onto the roof. The city skyline spread out in front of me, bright and alive. But up there, the wind howled. It whipped at my clothes, and I had to steady myself. I flicked on the flashlight and scanned the area. Broken chairs, old debris, some puddles near the drain. No sign of music, no sign of people, no sign of a party. I walked toward the center of the roof, stepping around vents and pipes. My flashlight beam quivered across chipped concrete. When I reached the spot right above my apartment, I stopped. I listened. Nothing. Not a single note of music or laugh or clinking glass. Just the wind. My heart was racing, and my breathing was erratic. I looked around, half expecting to see a hidden door or some secret staircase, but there was nothing. I stomped my foot and it made a dull thud. The roof felt solid. No hidden rooms, no trapdoors. For a minute, I stood there in silence, letting the wind push against my body. I felt foolish. Then I turned around and headed back. When I got to my apartment, the noises were gone. My rooms were quiet except for the low hum of my fridge. I sat down on the couch, exhausted. My muscles felt stiff, and my head pounded with the rhythm of my pulse. I couldn't explain what was happening. I thought about leaving, finding another place. But I'd signed a lease, and I couldn't afford a new deposit somewhere else. Plus, my job was walking distance from here, which saved me money. I felt stuck. In the weeks that followed, I settled into a strange routine. The noises kept coming every other night or so. Sometimes I'd wake up drenched in sweat at 3 a.m. because of a burst of laughter from above. Other times I'd sit at my table waiting for the thumps to start. I even tried wearing headphones to bed, blasting white noise or podcasts. It helped a bit, but I still felt the vibrations through the ceiling. Every time it happened, my nerves lit up and my heart started racing. I stopped bothering Dora with questions because she had told me everything she knew. The older man in 203 seemed too wary to discuss it further. I didn't feel like calling an official to check. I knew they'd find nothing. The landlord was the type to brush me off. Eventually, I started ignoring it the best I could. Some nights I almost convinced myself it was a normal part of living in an old building. But deep down, I knew it was something else. I never figured out what caused the noise. I never found a hidden space or any real evidence of an actual party up there. All I know is that the clinking glasses, the distant chatter, and the scratchy music never really stopped. Even now, sometimes when I come home late, I hear that faint thump before I even reach my door. My heart beats faster and that sense of dread grips me. It's like the upper floor is still there in some way, hosting a party that refuses to end. I've learned to live with it, though I can't say I'm comfortable. I keep telling myself it's just echoes, or maybe something else I can't explain. So far, I'm still here, dealing with the tense nights and the hollow feeling in my chest every time I hear those muffled celebrations. It's not ideal, but it's where I am. And every night, I wonder if the party upstairs will ever truly stop. I woke up because something sounded off in the living room. It wasn't a loud crash or the usual groan of the house settling. It was a mechanical hum. Sharp, unmistakable. My mind snapped awake right away. I sat up in bed with a jolt, heart pounding, sweat prickling on my forehead even though the night felt cold. I got up, pulled on a t-shirt, and walked toward the living room. I heard the whirring noise grow louder with each step. It sounded like something rolling in circles, like tires spinning on the floor. At first I thought I was imagining it, or maybe it was coming from outside, but the sound was definitely inside. I flicked on the hallway light. My hands felt shaky. I clenched my fists a few times, trying to keep calm. I could feel a knot in my stomach because I already had a bad feeling about this. Earlier that day, a relative had given me a remote control car that had been used during the holidays. The person who owned it had drained the batteries and left it on the living room table. I didn't think much about it at the time. No batteries, so it couldn't do anything. But as I crept closer to the living room that night, I realized that the noise was coming from that same remote control car. I stopped at the edge of the hallway, leaning against the wall. The living room lights were off. The only illumination came from a small lamp in the corner, which I had left on because I hate walking into pitch darkness. The car was on the wooden floor, headlights off, wheels spinning in a circle. It moved around and around, making a grinding sound as its plastic tires scraped the floor. My arms went cold. My breathing grew shallow. The remote control sat on the couch, its power switch in the off position, and the car itself should have had no batteries. I stayed still for a moment, trying to make sense of it. I rubbed my eyes. I looked at the couch. I could see the remote there, untouched. I took a few steps closer and realized the car was definitely moving on its own. It wasn't rolling by gravity or a slope in the floor. It kept circling in the same spot like it was stuck in a loop. The wheels turned at a steady speed. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. It was that pulse you get when you know something's really wrong. My brain was scrambling for a rational explanation. Maybe I missed some spare batteries? Maybe the switch on the car was set to on and it had some stored energy or a capacitor. But that didn't make sense. It should have died out after a few seconds if that were the case, not keep running in circles. I took a few more cautious steps forward. I wanted to pick it up, but my gut twisted in protest. My skin prickled. It felt like walking into a trap, even though it was just a toy. The humming noise drilled into my ears. I swallowed hard, then reached out and grabbed the car by the roof. The plastic felt cool. The wheels whirred under my fingers, and I flicked the little switch under the chassis. It was already set to off. My chest tightened. I felt my breath catch. The wheels were still turning despite the switch being off. I lifted the car and carried it to the table, looking underneath for anything suspicious. Nothing. Just the empty battery compartment. No AA batteries, no hidden wires. It was clean and open. Yet the car vibrated in my hands like it was fighting to keep moving. I squeezed it a bit, trying to press the wheels in place. They spun for another second, then stopped. The moment they stopped, I heard my own heartbeat loud and heavy in my head. I looked around the room. Everything else was normal. The couch was empty. The remote sat there like some dead thing. The blinds were drawn. The TV was off. The only sound was my breathing. I placed the car on the table, stared at it for a minute, and waited. Nothing happened. The wheels stayed still. I felt relief flooding through my body. My shoulders loosened up. I let out a long breath and figured maybe there was a glitch or some leftover charge in some internal circuit. That had to be it. I turned around and headed back to the hallway. Then the wheels spun again behind me. The noise made me freeze. It was a short buzz, like someone testing the throttle on the remote. I whipped around. The car hadn't moved from where I left it, but I swear I saw the wheels jerk. A tightness gripped my stomach. My eyes darted to the couch, checking the remote. Still off. No one there. No one else in the apartment. I grabbed the remote and looked at it. Nothing weird. The battery door on the remote was open too. No batteries. It was as powerless as the car should have been. I put it back on the couch and stared at the car, half expecting something else to happen. But it just sat there, silent. I rubbed my arms, which were covered in goosebumps, and decided to go back to bed. It was 2 a.m, and I was exhausted. I told myself I'd figure out some logical explanation in the daylight. Maybe the toy had some leftover power from a half-used battery I missed. I could check better in the morning, maybe with a flashlight. So I went back to my bedroom, closed the door, and got under the blankets. I lay there in the dark, waiting for some noise, but heard nothing. Eventually, I dozed off. Not long after, I heard that loud buzzing noise again. It was more frantic this time, like the car was jerking all over the floor. My eyes snapped open. My throat felt dry, and my chest felt tight. I rolled out of bed, nearly stumbled, and rushed to the living room, flipping every light on as I went. The adrenaline made my legs shake. I found the car on the floor again, not on the table where I'd left it. It was close to the TV stand, spinning in tight circles. The front tires squeaked, like they were trying to pivot on a single point. I stood there, unable to move. The overhead light buzzed softly. I could hear my breath, shallow and ragged. I had no idea how the car ended up on the floor. I tried to recall if I might have left it there, but I knew I hadn't. I'd placed it on the table and walked away. My mouth felt dry, so I licked my lips and swallowed a few times. The sound of the car's tires on the wood floor set my teeth on edge. I took a step forward, not looking away. It was like approaching an animal, unsure if it might jump at me. I leaned down and picked it up again, feeling that same cold plastic in my hand. The wheels fought me, spinning hard for a moment. Then they stopped, like they lost all power. I checked the underside again. The switch was still off. The battery compartment was still empty. My pulse was racing and I felt sweat on the back of my neck. I set the car on the couch and backed away. I grabbed my phone off the coffee table to check the time. It was close to 3 in the morning. I moved around the living room, checking the windows, the door, and the entire floor. Everything was locked. No one else was in the apartment. I kept telling myself I had to stay calm, but my mind was jumping to all sorts of wild possibilities. Yet I refused to entertain them. I just needed to handle this in a practical way. So I stood there, watching the car, phone in hand, ready to record if it moved. The minutes stretched. It just sat there. I was so wired with adrenaline that I couldn't look away. My heart beat so fast I felt lightheaded. Then I decided to test something. I took the remote from the couch, examined it again, and flicked it on. Of course, nothing happened. There were no batteries. The LED didn't light up. It was dead. But I held it near the car, turning the little steering wheel knob and pressing the throttle. The car did nothing. I switched the remote off and set it back down. I ran a hand through my hair, unsure what to do. I paced the room, glancing at the car every few seconds. The silence felt heavy, like the entire apartment was waiting for something. I was wide awake now, no chance of sleep. My palms were sweaty, my mouth felt raw from breathing so fast. Every little sound, every creak in the walls made me jump. After a few minutes, I forced myself to walk out of the living room to get some water from the kitchen. I flicked on the kitchen light, opened the cabinet, grabbed a glass, and filled it. My hands were shaking so much I spilled a bit of water on the counter. I drank it down in big gulps, the cold water stinging my throat, and then filled the glass again just to have an excuse to keep busy. Suddenly, the noise started again from the living room. That same whirring, but louder. I almost dropped the glass. I slammed it on the counter and ran back. The car was off the couch, sitting by the coffee table, spinning in place again. I have no clue how it moved there in such a short time. I heard the wheels grinding against the wood floor. It looked like it was rotating on its own axis, completing tight circles. I wanted to run out of the apartment, but I also wanted an answer. I muttered to myself, "This can't be happening." My throat hurt from how dry and tense I felt. My legs were stiff and my head pounded. I walked to the car, crouched, and grabbed it. The wheels fought me again, then died. I looked around the room, checking for anything that could have triggered it. Nothing. I heard the fridge humming in the kitchen. The lights were bright and the remote was still on the couch, untouched. I felt my chest tighten again. Something was definitely off. This wasn't normal and I couldn't figure out a logical explanation. I decided I had to get the car out of my home, at least for the night. It clearly wasn't staying put. I marched to the front door and pulled it open. A rush of cold night air hit me in the face. I stepped onto the porch. My heart was in my throat. I placed the car on a small table on the porch. The moment I let go, I waited. No movement, no sound. The wheels stayed still. It was quiet, apart from some distant traffic noise. I stood there for at least a full minute, eyes glued to that toy, half expecting it to dash off the table. But it didn't. It just lay there. I exhaled, turned, and walked back inside, leaving the door slightly open so I could keep an eye on it. The car stayed motionless. I returned to the living room feeling like I'd just run a mile. My knees felt weak. I slowly sank onto the couch, leaning forward, elbows on my thighs. I stared at the open door, trying to calm my breathing. My hands were damp with sweat and my shirt clung to my back. Then I noticed the abrupt silence in the living room. No whirring, no grinding. The place felt normal, but my nerves were shot. I sat there for a long time, maybe half an hour, trying to see if I could hear anything from outside. Nothing. Not a single squeak from that car. Eventually, I got up and peeked through the door. The car was still on the table, motionless. The quiet felt almost eerie, but at least it wasn't doing laps around my living room anymore. I decided I couldn't deal with this any longer tonight. I closed and locked the door, checked all the windows, and turned off most of the lights except the small lamp in the corner. I was still too jumpy to sleep in total darkness. I went to my bedroom and lay down, heart still beating hard. My throat felt sore. I looked at the clock. Almost 4. My eyes wouldn't close for a while. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events in my mind. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. When I woke up, it was around 9. Sunshine leaked through the blinds. My body felt heavy and my head ached like I'd barely slept. I trudged to the living room. Everything was where I left it, quiet and still. I went outside to check the car. It was on the table right where I had placed it. The wheels were still, the switch was off, the battery compartment was empty. There was no sign it had moved. The air felt brisk and I shivered without a jacket. I brought it inside again, feeling uneasy. But the morning light gave me a bit more confidence. I set it on the counter and investigated every inch of the chassis, all the wiring. Nothing unusual. I checked the remote too. No batteries, nothing jammed or stuck inside. I tried turning the car on, then off with fresh batteries just to see if it worked normally. It did. The wheels spun when I used the remote. Everything seemed fine. Then I popped the batteries back out and left it off. No more spinning, no more weird behavior. Even so, the memory of that night stuck with me. I couldn't find a reason for what happened. No power source, no remote input, yet it moved. The tension in my chest lingered. I didn't want to keep that thing in my home anymore. I ended up packing it in a box and driving it to a storage unit. I felt uneasy throwing it in the trash, but I wasn't comfortable having it around. Once it was gone, the apartment felt normal again. I slept better, though I still got the occasional goosebumps whenever I heard a similar whirring sound, like a fan or a blender. But no more circling toy on the floor, and no more late-night wake-ups. I never found an explanation. No one I talked to had ever heard of a remote control car running without batteries. I kept telling myself there must be some logical cause, maybe a freak electrical issue or some leftover energy stored somewhere. But nothing made sense in the end. All I know is that the silence only returned when I took that car outside. And that's the entire story. It still makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. If you think dolls are harmless, you haven't slept in a room surrounded by 30 of them. I used to roll my eyes whenever I heard someone talk about creepy dolls. I never believed objects could make me feel uneasy. Then I spent 3 nights in my sister's bedroom while visiting her, and everything changed. I arrived at my sister's house on a Wednesday afternoon. I was tired from a long drive, and I just wanted a place to crash. My sister Marla greeted me at the door with a quick hug and a smile. She'd recently moved into a bigger house, and she was excited to show it off. I was mostly thinking about getting a shower and some food. I carried my bag inside and glanced around the entryway. The walls were cream-colored. The floor was smooth hardwood, and the air smelled like lemon cleaner. I could see boxes here and there that she hadn't unpacked yet. She told me she was still settling in. She showed me to her bedroom because she hadn't set up the guest room yet. I noticed boxes stacked in corners and a small couch with blankets piled on top. She apologized for the mess. She said she'd been too busy with work to organize everything, so I just nodded. I'm not picky. I saw her bed was neatly made, so I assumed that part was in order. Then I noticed the shelf above her dresser. It was crowded with dolls. There had to be at least 20 or 30 of them, all sitting or standing in neat rows. Most looked like porcelain dolls, some with glassy eyes that caught the light. Others were plastic with big dresses. I asked her why she had so many. She shrugged and said she'd collected them since she was a teenager. She started talking about how a few were gifts, a few were from thrift stores, and others she found online. She seemed to like them a lot. She showed me one with a little blue dress, then laughed when I didn't look impressed. I tried to act cool, but the dolls bugged me a bit. Each one had a face that stared straight ahead. Their eyes were all different shades of blue or brown or green. Some looked faded, others looked almost new. I shrugged it off. I told myself it was just a silly feeling, probably from being exhausted. Marla stepped out to grab some groceries, and I stayed behind to settle in. I tossed my backpack onto the bed and sat down for a moment. The dolls were lined up at eye level. I felt like they were all looking at me, even though I knew they were just positioned that way. I scanned each face. Some had little scuff marks, others had perfect paint. A few had chipped lips. I tried to ignore them, but I kept glancing at them. I shook my head and grabbed my phone, scrolling through social media to distract myself. That first night, I got under the covers a bit after midnight. I'd spent a couple of hours in the living room chatting with my sister, eating takeout, and watching some random show on TV. When I finally decided to go to bed, I turned off the overhead light and used the small lamp on the bedside table. The dolls sat there in the dim glow, rows of eyes reflecting the lamp's light. It felt like walking into a room full of silent watchers. I laid down and tried to sleep, but every time I shifted, I thought I saw a doll's head tilted a little more toward me. I'd freeze, heart beating faster. Then I'd look again and realize it hadn't moved. After a while, I got tired of spooking myself, so I forced my eyes shut. I stayed that way, half asleep, half listening to the night sounds. The house was settling. The air conditioning kicked on with a hum. I could hear branches tapping the window outside. I told myself it was all normal. I woke up around 3 a.m. with a jolt. I felt like I'd heard something, maybe a little thump or scrape. I didn't know if I'd dreamed it or not, but I lay there, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. The lamp was still on, but I had turned it down to its lowest setting. The shelf was in shadow. I couldn't see all the dolls clearly. My breathing felt rough. I held it for a moment, trying to hear any movement. It was quiet. I eventually convinced myself there was nothing there. I rolled onto my side and stared at the wall until I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up and felt silly. Marla was in the kitchen, pouring coffee and laughing at a radio show. I walked in, yawning, and she handed me a mug. I asked if she was aware of any weird noises during the night. She gave me a puzzled look and shook her head. I just shrugged. I didn't want to come off as paranoid, so I changed the subject to her plans for the weekend. The second day was uneventful. We had lunch at a diner, then did some grocery shopping. When we got back, she went to her room to organize some boxes while I scrolled through job emails on my phone. Every so often, I heard a door closing or something dropping. Around dinner, we ordered pizza, and then she decided to watch a movie in the living room. I told her I'd join her in a bit, but first I wanted to grab my hoodie from her bedroom. I walked in, flicked on the light, and paused. I wasn't sure why, but I had this urge to look at the dolls again. I don't know what I expected to see. Maybe one of them in a different position or some sign that they'd been moved. They all looked the same as before, lined up neatly. I noticed a small gap in the second row, like one doll was missing, but I couldn't remember if it was always like that. I grabbed my hoodie and left. I figured my mind was playing tricks on me. I told myself to stop obsessing over it. That night I tried to sleep earlier, around 11 p.m. I wasn't in the mood for more late-night creeping around. I turned off the big light, left the lamp on, and got under the sheets. I stared at my phone for a bit, reading random stuff online. My eyes got heavy, so I set the phone aside, turned off the lamp, and let darkness fill the room. The only light came from a small sliver under the door, where the hallway light was on. I felt safer that way. I thought if the room was dark, I wouldn't see the doll's eyes shining at me. At some point, I heard a soft rustle. I opened my eyes, but the room was so dark I couldn't see the shelf clearly. My heart started pounding again. I waited. Something about the air felt heavier. It was like the moment before a storm when everything goes still. I reached over and flicked on my phone's flashlight. The beam of light hit the shelf, revealing the rows of dolls. They were all there, lined up, but one looked tilted at an angle, like it had turned slightly. I couldn't be sure. I tried shining the light more directly, but my hand was shaking. My mouth felt dry. I told myself maybe it was always at that angle. I turned off the flashlight and forced myself to close my eyes. My breathing was shaky. I could hear my own heartbeat. After a few minutes, exhaustion won and I drifted off. I woke up again around 2 a.m. with a feeling like my stomach had clenched. I opened my eyes, not sure why I felt so uneasy. My phone was near my hand, so I turned the flashlight on again. The first thing I saw was a doll on the bed about a foot from my feet. It was sitting upright against the blanket, its glassy eyes looking right at me. My body tensed, and I let out a gasp. The doll had blonde hair and a pale face. It was wearing a small pink dress. I remembered seeing it on the shelf. Its limbs were bent like someone had posed it in a sitting position. I felt my heart pounding so hard that it hurt. I slid away from it, almost falling off the other side of the bed. My mouth felt like sandpaper. My brain was racing with questions. Did Marla do this as a joke? Did it fall? How would it land sitting upright? I got up, grabbed the doll by the torso and held it at arm's length. Its eyes seemed to catch the light from the phone. I felt a chill on my arms. I set it on the dresser and whispered, "Marla, this is not funny." I waited to see if she'd pop out or something, but the house was still quiet. I stood there for a few seconds, catching my breath, and then I placed the doll back on the shelf, wedging it between two others. I made sure it was secure and wouldn't just tip over. My hands were shaking and I could feel sweat running down the side of my face. I reached for the doorknob, opened the door, and stepped into the hallway. Everything looked normal with the dull ceiling light on. I walked to Marla's door, which was closed. I hesitated before knocking. Part of me worried she'd laugh or say I was losing it, but I needed to know if she was messing with me. So I knocked softly. She answered with a groggy voice. I opened the door a crack, apologized, and told her I had to ask something. She was half asleep, hair messy, eyes squinting in the light from the hallway. I asked if she had moved one of her dolls onto the bed to scare me. She frowned and shook her head. She said she'd been sleeping for a while. I believed her. There was no reason for her to lie in that state. She wasn't smirking or anything, she just seemed confused. I said, "Okay, sorry for waking you." Then I closed her door and leaned against the wall. I felt a wave of nausea. I didn't want to return to the bedroom. I stood there in the hallway for at least a minute, thinking about how insane it all seemed. I felt sweaty and cold at the same time. My hands were clammy. I could still picture that doll sitting there on the bed like it was watching me. I went back in, just long enough to grab my bag and phone charger. I glanced at the shelf. The dolls were all in place. The one in pink was still in the spot I'd shoved it. I didn't look too closely. I didn't want to see something that would make me panic. I flipped the light off and left the room. I closed the door behind me. I felt a strange sense of relief when I was back in the hallway. It felt safer out there, away from that shelf. I walked to the living room and dropped my stuff on the couch. I decided I would sleep out there for the rest of the night. I turned on a small table lamp, pulled a blanket off the back of the couch, and sat down. My thoughts kept racing. I tried telling myself there must be a logical explanation. Maybe the doll fell off the shelf and just landed upright, but I couldn't shake the feeling it was placed there. I didn't want to scare my sister or start an argument about it. I just wanted to get through the rest of the night. I turned on the TV at a low volume and tried to calm down. My pulse was still a bit fast, and every small noise in the house made me jump. After a while, I dozed off with the TV still on. The next morning, Marla found me on the couch. She asked if something was wrong with the bed. I told her I couldn't sleep well in there. I admitted it might be the dolls that bothered me. She looked surprised, but not angry. She offered to move them, but I said it was okay, I just didn't feel comfortable. I didn't want to touch them again, and I didn't want to cause a scene. We left it at that. I spent the rest of my time there, sleeping on the couch. I'd go in the bedroom only to get clothes. I'd avoid looking at that shelf. I'd feel my stomach twist every time I caught a glimpse of those dolls. On my last morning before leaving, I walked in to gather my stuff. The dolls looked the same as always, lined up. I shoved my belongings into my bag as fast as I could. My sister said goodbye in the living room, and I promised to visit again soon. I didn't mention the dolls anymore. When I finally got in my car and started driving away, I felt this huge sense of relief. I kept thinking about that one moment when I saw the doll sitting on the bed. The image still makes my skin crawl. I don't know if I'll ever look at dolls the same way again. That experience just shook me. Even now, I don't have a logical explanation, but I'm done trying to find one. All I know is, I'll never sleep in that room again. If someone suggests it, I'll remember that face looking at me in the dark, and I'll find somewhere else to crash. That's the simplest way to handle it. I'm not spending another night with those things staring at me. I felt a chill run down my arms the moment I stepped onto that farm. The sign out front was old and faded, and the gravel parking lot was empty except for my rental car. A guide waited by the entrance to the main house, leaning against a post and checking his watch. The place looked ordinary at first: peeling paint, a sagging porch, a broken wind vane perched on the roof. But I sensed something off. I had driven 2 hours to see this place because I'd heard rumors of strange sightings. I didn't expect to find anything that would get under my skin, but I was wrong. I walked up to the guide and shook his hand. He seemed polite but distracted. He told me they still ran tours even though the property was falling apart in some areas. He said the owners in the past had endured all kinds of hardships. I asked him what he meant by hardships, and he shrugged. He mentioned illnesses, fires, and a lot of stress that tore the family apart. I wanted more details, but he just told me to wait for the official tour. Inside the main house, about 10 tourists gathered in the front hall. The walls were covered in black and white photographs of stern-faced men and women in formal clothes. We followed another guide through rooms filled with dusty furniture. Some sections were roped off because the floors were too unstable to hold a crowd. I noticed how quiet it was despite the footsteps and hushed voices. No birds outside, no breeze through the windows. It felt closed in, as if the place wanted to swallow us. The guide told us about different events: crops ruined by storms, a fire in the barn that destroyed equipment, and rumors of large debts. People eventually abandoned the place until some distant relatives renovated it and opened it for tourists. He said a few folks claimed to hear voices in the house at night. He talked about shadows in the upstairs windows after closing time. I rolled my eyes a bit because I'd heard similar stories before. But then I realized the guide was dead serious. His voice never wavered, and he spoke like someone sharing actual facts, not sensational ghost tales. We left the main house and crossed the yard to a smaller structure behind it. This building had been a workshop or storage space. Rusty tools hung on the walls, and the guide pointed out how some were original to the farm. He explained that the family's troubles started getting worse around the time they built the workshop. He hinted at tense relationships and sleepless nights. He didn't mention any deaths, but he made it sound like the stress crushed everyone who lived here. The group split up after that. A few people wandered around the property on their own. I stayed behind to talk with the guide. I asked if there were any specific strange occurrences that multiple visitors reported. He hesitated, then said, "Sometimes people say they see a woman walking the grounds at night wearing a white dress or something similar. They claim she looks worried, but I can't confirm anything." I pressed him for details, and he admitted that he'd heard the story from other guides too. Some folks claimed they heard her calling out, almost like she was searching for someone. He gave me a slight grin, as if he wasn't sure he should be telling me. Then he excused himself to catch up with the rest of the group. I spent another hour roaming the open areas. I walked around the big barn, the smaller sheds, and the fields. It was late afternoon, and a thick haze hung in the distance. Everything felt muggy. My shirt clung to my back. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected someone to be standing there, but I didn't see anything unusual. I only heard the crunch of gravel under my boots and the faint rustle of leaves along the fence line. By the time I finished, the farm was closing up. They locked the gates around 5 in the evening. I headed to a small inn about a mile down the road. It was a simple place with a short driveway and a wooden sign that said, "Country Rest." I parked and hauled my bag to the front desk. The woman there handed me a key without much chatter. My room was on the second floor, facing a row of trees that separated the property from another field. I unpacked and grabbed a quick dinner at a diner a few blocks away. I kept thinking about the farm. The stories the guide told me played over and over in my head. I wondered if the stress and conflicts they faced had left some imprint on the land. I'd read about places that supposedly held on to strong emotions, but I shrugged it off. I was used to hearing local legends exaggerated for tourist appeal. When I got back to the inn, it was already dark. I decided to get some sleep so I could return to the farm the next morning. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange feeling. I couldn't pinpoint what had disturbed me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint hum of air conditioning. Then I heard a noise. It sounded like someone calling my name. At first I thought it was my imagination or a leftover thread from a dream, but I heard it again. It was a faint voice saying, "Hey, are you there?" My heart pounded. My palms were suddenly sweaty. I sat up and moved to the window. The night outside was nearly pitch black. The inn's outdoor light illuminated a small patch near the driveway, but the trees in the field beyond were swallowed by darkness. I pressed my face to the glass, squinting to see if anyone stood out there. The voice came again, softer this time, but it definitely sounded like someone calling for me. I couldn't see anyone. My stomach twisted. I felt a rush of adrenaline push through my legs and chest. My hands shook and I realized I was breathing faster than normal. I opened the window a few inches. A cool breeze brushed against my face. Then I heard a whisper. It felt closer, but I still couldn't see anyone. I caught a glimpse of something white moving near the edge of the trees. It didn't look like a flash of light or a reflection. It looked like a person in pale clothing. I froze, not sure if I should call out or stay quiet. I managed to say, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded shaky. I waited, but there was no response, just the faint rustle of leaves. A few seconds later, I saw movement again. This time, the figure stepped closer to the small patch of light from the inn sign. It appeared to be a woman wearing a long white dress. I saw her head turn slightly as if she was searching for something. My pulse raced and I felt like my mouth was dry as sand. I kept blinking, trying to be sure I wasn't dreaming. She looked toward the window. I couldn't see her face clearly, just the outline of her features. She seemed anxious, almost desperate. Her shoulders were tense, and her posture suggested she was trying to call for help. I stayed silent, gripping the windowsill so hard my knuckles turned white. Then she turned away, took a few steps back into the darkness, and disappeared behind the trees. That was it. The field fell quiet again. I stood there for what felt like minutes, waiting to see if she would come back. My heart was pounding in my ears. I tried to calm myself down, but 1,000 thoughts spun through my mind. I wondered if I should run outside and check. Maybe she was an actual person who needed assistance. But something about her appearance felt too odd, too sudden, too silent. I hesitated, then decided to go downstairs. I grabbed a flashlight from my car and walked around the back of the inn. The gravel crunched under my feet and I felt my pulse thumping in my neck. The trees were tall and the darkness between them was thick. I shone the flashlight around, but I didn't see anyone. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed a bit, but there was no reply. After a few minutes of searching, I gave up. My arms felt cold despite the warm air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I went back to my room and locked the door. I sat on the bed, wide awake. I could still hear that voice. It replayed in my head, like it was stuck on loop. I think I dozed off around 3 a.m. because the next thing I knew, sunlight streamed in through the curtains, and my phone alarm was buzzing. I didn't feel rested at all. My eyes felt gritty and my muscles were stiff. I got dressed and walked downstairs. The innkeeper asked if I slept well, and I just nodded. I didn't mention the night's events. I drove back to the farm, wanting to catch the morning tour. The air was cooler than the previous day, and I felt a slight breeze on my face when I got out of the car. I saw the same guide from before. He recognized me and waved. We walked around to the back of the main house. I asked him straight out if he'd ever heard visitors mention seeing a woman in white near the inn or outside the farm grounds. He looked at me, paused, then nodded slowly. He told me a few people had reported hearing voices or seeing a figure in the fields at night. Most of them described a woman dressed in something light-colored, looking distraught or confused. He said some folks assumed it was a local resident wandering around, but no one had been able to confirm it. Others thought it was just the power of suggestion. He mentioned that stories about the place might make people imagine things, but he added that the similarities in the descriptions were too strong to ignore. He'd never seen it himself, but he'd heard enough accounts to believe something odd was happening. I got a strange sense of relief hearing that I wasn't the only one. I told him what happened at the inn. I described the voice calling my name and the figure I saw near the trees. He asked if I was sure she spoke my actual name. I had to admit I wasn't positive. It was more like a muffled call that I interpreted as someone calling for me. My brain filled in the details in that moment of half-sleep, but I had been awake enough to see a person outside. That part I was sure about. He suggested I talk with another guide who'd worked there longer. We walked over to a small shed near the barn. An older man in a straw hat was sweeping the doorway. We exchanged greetings and I shared my experience from the night before. The older man listened without interrupting. When I finished, he set the broom aside and said people had been describing that woman for years. He recalled a couple who claimed she tapped on their window at 2 a.m. Another visitor said they heard footsteps on the porch of the inn, but saw no one outside. Some said she wore a white gown. Others said it was just light clothing. The older man shrugged and said nobody knew who she was. She never seemed aggressive, just sad or in need of help. I spent the rest of the morning walking the farm's perimeter, taking note of anything that could explain what I saw. Maybe there was a path leading to the inn. Maybe there was a neighbor who sometimes walked around at night. But I only found old fences, tangled weeds, and a few narrow trails. No recent footprints, no sign of regular movement. Around noon, I returned to the main house. The guide asked if I wanted to see the second floor, which was normally off-limits, but he said the owners were okay with it as long as I was careful. We climbed a creaking staircase. The hallway was dim, and the floorboards felt soft in spots. He showed me a bedroom filled with antique furniture, covered in sheets to protect against dust. The windows faced the fields behind the property. The guide said that sometimes people on the farm spotted a white figure out there, usually just before dawn or late at night. I told him my entire body tensed up last night when I saw the figure by the trees. I remembered feeling pins and needles in my arms. My stomach sank at the thought of opening the window and seeing someone staring back at me. He nodded, said he understood that reaction. I realized I was gripping the railing as we spoke. My knuckles were white again, just like they had been the night before. We went back down to the first floor. The tour ended soon after, and people drifted out toward the gift shop near the exit. I stepped outside, feeling the sun on my face. I watched a few people chat by their cars, and I wondered if they would see anything that night. Part of me wanted to stay another night at the inn to see if the woman would appear again, but I felt uneasy about the whole situation. I was still rattled, and my head ached from lack of sleep. As I was about to leave, the older man in the straw hat waved me over. He said, "I don't know if this helps, but if you see her again, maybe try talking to her. Some folks say she goes away when they speak up." I asked if anyone had gotten a response from her. He shook his head. He said most people either freeze in fear or hide, but he thought it might be worth a try. I thanked him and got in my car. My hands were trembling a bit as I started the engine. I looked back at the old farm in the rearview mirror. The paint on the house looked dull and chipped in the bright sun. The barn leaned to one side. The field behind the house rippled with the breeze. I thought about the woman in white, how she had turned her head so slowly, as if listening for a voice or a sign. I felt a tightness in my chest again. The memory of that moment made me uneasy, but I couldn't deny it was real. I drove back toward the highway, debating if I should stay another night. In the end, I decided one night was enough. I wasn't sure I could handle a second round of that tension. My mind kept returning to the image of her shape in the darkness, the sound of her faint voice. It wasn't until I reached the city that I noticed my shoulders were sore from being so tense. A few days later, I called the farm's office. I told them I was writing down my experiences and asked if anyone else had reported a similar vision recently. The person on the phone confirmed that yes, a few visitors had described a woman in white and a voice in the night. They hadn't found any explanation. They said it seemed to happen randomly, without a set schedule or location. Sometimes near the inn, sometimes on the farm itself. I hung up feeling both relieved and unsettled. I wasn't alone in what I saw. Others had the same experience, but there was no closure. No one knew who she was or why she appeared. There were rumors of old family hardships, but nothing that pointed to a clear identity. Some said she might just be a lingering echo of the farm's stressful past. Others dismissed it as a myth fueled by imagination. All I knew was that it felt real to me, and I still hear that faint whisper in my sleep every now and then. That's how it all happened. I went to that old farm out of curiosity. I heard the guides talk about past tragedies, saw the creaky buildings and the worn paths. Then I spent one night in a nearby inn. I woke up to a voice calling me. I looked out the window and saw a woman in white. She seemed desperate, like she wanted help or comfort. Then she vanished among the trees. The next day, the guides told me many people had reported the same vision. I left with my nerves on edge and my heart still pounding. Even now, every time I remember that night, my spine tingles. I keep seeing that outline by the tree line, and it feels like she's still out there, stuck in time, waiting for someone to notice her. I heard the keys hit the carpet while I was typing an email in my home office. The sound was soft, but it startled me because I knew there was nothing on my desk that could have fallen. My office is small, with just a desk, a chair, and a filing cabinet against the wall. There's a small window to my right that looks out at the street. I remember turning my head and seeing the keys on the floor, right next to my desk chair. My heart thumped once hard, because I recognized those keys instantly. I had lost them 2 weeks earlier at a party in another city, and I'd given up any hope of finding them. Seeing them suddenly appear on my home office floor made my stomach tighten. I stood up, reached down, and picked them up. They felt cold, and the metal edges pressed against my palm. I had been at a birthday party for a friend in a neighboring city. It was late, and there were a lot of people in a small apartment. It was cramped and loud. I had a couple of beers, but I remember feeling clear enough to keep track of my stuff, my wallet, my phone, and my keys. At some point, I realized my keys were gone. I checked under couches and in the bathroom. I went through the cushions. I asked everybody if they'd seen a set of car keys with a small leather keychain. No one had. I got a little anxious because I lived an hour away. Eventually, my friend let me crash on his couch, and I arranged to get a locksmith to open my place the next day. I filed a police report for the lost keys just in case. After a week or so, I moved on. I assumed they were gone for good. Now they were in my hand. I felt a small pulse in my temples as I tried to make sense of it. I checked the time on my phone. It was just after 3 in the afternoon. I looked around the office. Nothing else seemed out of place. The window was locked, and the door to the hallway was open like usual. I set the keys on the desk and took a couple of slow breaths. My hands were a little shaky. I thought about calling the friend who hosted that party, but I felt silly. I couldn't even figure out how to start that conversation. Hey, guess what? My lost keys just popped up on my floor. It sounded ridiculous, so I left it alone. That same night, I was in the kitchen, making dinner. I live alone, so I usually toss something in the microwave or cook a quick meal on the stove. I had the lights on, and the overhead fixture started flickering. At first, it was just a brief flicker, like an electrical hiccup. I figured it was a wiring issue. The light flickered again, more intensely, and then it steadied. I didn't think much of it. My house is a bit old, and I've dealt with small electrical problems before. But while I was eating, I felt this strange sensation at the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I glanced at the kitchen doorway a couple of times, but I saw nothing. I just felt this unease. I tried to ignore it and focus on my food, but my stomach was tense. Later, I went to my bedroom to grab something and heard a creak in the hallway. My house makes noises sometimes, especially when the temperature changes, but this sounded like a deliberate step on a squeaky floorboard. I froze and listened. My mouth felt dry, and I noticed my pulse picking up. I waited for more sounds, but I heard nothing. I flicked on the hallway light and saw no one there. I checked the front door. It was locked. I walked through the living room and then the guest room. Everything seemed normal. I told myself I was just being jumpy because of the weird key incident. The next day, I was in the living room watching TV. My mind kept wandering back to those keys. I had placed them in a small dish by the front door, where I usually keep spare change. At some point, I heard a faint clicking sound from the hallway. It reminded me of metal tapping against something. I muted the TV and listened. The clicking stopped. I went to the hallway and noticed my keys were no longer in the dish. I found them on the floor a few feet away near the corner of the wall. It looked like they had fallen, but the distance was odd. They'd have to be thrown or slid off with some force to land that far. I bent down and picked them up. The metal felt cool again. I tried to shrug it off, but I felt a twinge in my chest. It was that same uneasy feeling as before. I started checking the locks on my doors twice before going to bed. I also began leaving a light on in the living room at night. I hate wasting electricity, but something about the darkness in the house made me uneasy. I'd wake up sometimes around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. and think I heard footsteps. My heart would pound in my chest and I'd break out in a sweat. I'd tell myself it was the house settling or the pipes. Sometimes I'd get up, flip on every light in the hallway and stand there listening. I never saw anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone in the house. A few days after the keys reappeared, I was in my home office again, catching up on work emails. The overhead light flickered once, twice, then went out for a second before coming back. My computer screen stayed on, so it wasn't a complete power outage. It felt targeted, like someone was playing with the switch. I rubbed my face and tried to refocus on my work. Then I heard a distinct sound right behind me. It was like a quick shuffle of feet. I sprang up from the chair so fast it nearly fell over. I turned around. Nothing was there. I stared at the spot for several seconds, waiting to see any movement. I felt my breath getting shallow, so I forced myself to inhale deeply a couple of times. My body was tense, and I realized my fingers were trembling. I had a sudden urge to get out of the house, so I grabbed my jacket and left. I drove around the block a few times trying to clear my head. I ended up going to a coffee shop. I sat there and drank a coffee even though I don't usually have caffeine at that time of day. My mind was racing with possibilities. Could someone have broken in and was messing with me? Could I have brought back something from that party? Something I couldn't explain? I thought about the timeline. I had lost my keys in another city 2 weeks earlier. Now they were here, in my house, without any explanation. Since they'd shown up, I'd been dealing with strange lights, weird noises, and that constant feeling of being watched. When I got home, it was around 7 in the evening. I left the porch light on. I remember stepping through the door and pausing in the entryway. The house felt colder than usual. I checked the thermostat in the hallway. It was set to its normal temperature. I adjusted it a bit higher. Then I saw my keys again, this time on the small table under the hallway mirror. I had left them in the dish before I drove off. I picked them up carefully. The weight felt normal, but I noticed a faint scratch on the leather keychain that I didn't remember seeing before. I ran my finger over it. It was rough to the touch. I placed the keys back in the dish and went to the kitchen to make something for dinner. I tried to distract myself, but I felt unsettled. Over the next week, the strange occurrences got worse. I'd turn on a light switch, and the bulb would flicker until I turned it off and on again. Sometimes I'd be in bed, half asleep, and I'd hear distinct footsteps in the living room. They were steady and slow. I'd sit up, adrenaline shooting through my body, and listen until my ears rang. When I went to check, the room was empty. I looked in every corner, under tables, behind curtains. Nothing. My eyes would dart around, expecting to see a person, but I was always alone. I tried to record any sounds with my phone once, but all I got was static and my own breathing. One morning, I decided to call an electrician. He came by, checked the circuit breakers, tested some wiring, and said everything looked fine. He replaced a couple of old switches, but he didn't find anything else. I asked him if faulty wiring could cause lights to flicker randomly and possibly make random noises in the walls. He said maybe, but it wouldn't explain footsteps. He kinda laughed and said I might have raccoons in the attic. I don't have an attic. That evening, the flickering seemed even more frequent, like it was reacting to my frustration. I started losing sleep. I'd wake up gasping, convinced I heard someone breathing near my bed. My arms and legs felt jittery, and my eyes stung from exhaustion. At work, I couldn't concentrate. I'd stare at the computer screen, remembering the feeling of the keys in my hand and the cold spots in my house. I became paranoid about locking doors and windows. I checked them obsessively before I left for the office each morning. I started feeling reluctant to come home in the evenings. One night I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom, and I heard a knock on the bathroom door. It wasn't a soft knock. It was a solid single rap. I froze with the toothbrush in my mouth, foam around my lips, and stared at the door. My chest tightened. The door was unlocked, so I turned the knob fast and yanked it open, expecting to see something there. The hallway was empty. I left the bathroom light on and walked through the entire house. The living room lamp flickered again. My breath caught in my throat. I could smell my own sweat. I forced myself to finish brushing my teeth, but my hands were shaking so much that I kept spitting foam all over the sink. After that, I moved the keys into a drawer in my bedside table. I thought maybe if I kept them out of sight, the strange activity would stop. It didn't. Lights still flickered. Footsteps still happened. One time I felt a sudden breeze pass by me in the living room, like something brushed my arm. I jerked away and almost dropped my phone. There was no open window, no fan, no draft that could explain it. My skin crawled and my heart thumped so hard I could hear it in my ears. I ended up leaving the house again, just to catch my breath outside. I tried to talk to a couple of friends about it. I kept it casual, more like I was complaining about electrical issues and weird house noises. They asked if I'd checked for rodents or if I needed a home inspection. I didn't go into the details about the keys appearing out of nowhere. I was worried they'd think I was either losing it or making up stories. Deep down, though, I suspected something else was happening, something I couldn't label. I just knew I'd lost those keys in another city, and then 2 weeks later, they were in my house. Everything changed after that moment. Last night I was in bed reading on my phone, trying to tire my eyes out. I left the door to my bedroom open a crack because the hallway light was on. I kept hearing a faint shuffling sound. It was slow and steady, like someone rubbing their feet on the carpet. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. My chest felt tight, and my breathing got shallow. I propped myself up on one elbow and listened. The sound seemed to be right outside my door. I leaned over and peeked into the hallway. There was nothing there, just the light illuminating that stretch of carpet. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. My shoulders tensed, and I got that pressure in my chest again. Suddenly, the hallway light flickered, plunging the hall into darkness for a split second before turning back on. My heart pounded, and I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. When I finally dozed off, I had restless sleep. I kept drifting in and out, expecting to hear footsteps again. My dreams or half-dreams were just me walking through my own house, flipping on lights that wouldn't stay on. I woke up a few times drenched in sweat, my t-shirt sticking to my back. I stared at the ceiling, feeling this dread in the pit of my stomach. I remember thinking that whatever came into my house with those keys wasn't leaving. I've considered throwing the keys away, but a part of me is afraid that might make things worse. Sometimes I tell myself there must be a logical explanation. Maybe someone returned them without telling me, and I'm just overstressed about random electrical issues. But each time I hear those footsteps in an empty room or feel that cold air brush past me, I can't shake the thought that I let something else into my home when those keys showed up. I've tried cleaning the house, rearranging furniture, anything to break the tension. I still feel it, especially at night, like something is right there with me. And that's where I am now, sitting in my home office typing this out, trying to stay calm and hoping that I'll find a rational solution. But every time I catch a flicker in the corner of my eye, or hear a creak that doesn't fit the usual house sounds, I remember the shock of seeing those keys on the carpet and the way everything felt wrong from that moment on. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe here again. I remember that night like it happened yesterday. The place was quiet, the lights were dim, and the old wooden floors creaked every time we shifted our weight. Mark and I were tired from a long shift at the cafe, but we still had to finish counting the register. We weren't in a rush, but there was a strange feeling in the back of my mind that kept telling me to move faster. Everything felt heavier than usual, like the air was thicker, or the lights were a bit too weak. We were alone in that historical house, and every little sound echoed through the halls. I thought I heard a soft thump near the kitchen a few times, but I shrugged it off. I focused on the bills and coins in front of me, hoping to get out of there soon. Mark and I worked at this cafe for about 6 months. The building was known around town for its age. It had creaky staircases, old beams in the ceilings, and a lot of odd corners that didn't seem to serve any real purpose. The owner had turned part of the ground floor into the main dining area, and another small room into the kitchen. There was a long hallway that led to a storage room, and a couple of other closed-off rooms we didn't use. A few staff members mentioned seeing shapes at the end of that hallway, or hearing voices when no one was there. Some people claimed the building was haunted, but I never really believed any of that. I grew up in a practical household. My parents always told me to trust what I could see, and not worry about things I couldn't explain right away. It was around 11 p.m. that night. The cafe had been empty for an hour. We usually closed by 10, but sometimes we stayed an extra half hour or so to make sure the dining area was clean and the kitchen wasn't a mess. Mark was leaning over the register, counting out the cash. I was checking credit card receipts and comparing them with the totals. We were both quiet because we were tired. The only real sounds were the distant hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen and a faint buzzing from the overhead lights. Once in a while, I heard a small pop from the heating system. The day had been warm, but the temperature dropped as soon as the sun went down, so the heat clicked on automatically. I remember looking at Mark and noticing his eyes shift toward the hallway to our left. It looked like he was expecting something. He froze for a second, then shook his head and went back to counting. I asked him if he was okay, and he just mumbled that he was tired. I tried to ignore the tension in his voice, but it was obvious he felt uneasy. That's when I heard it too, a faint scraping sound from somewhere near the kitchen. It sounded like a chair being dragged a few inches across the floor. I stopped what I was doing and listened. Mark and I stared at each other for a moment. I asked him if he heard that. He nodded. He put down the bills and motioned for me to follow him. We walked slowly toward the kitchen. My heart started pounding. My palms felt sweaty. I tried to shake it off by telling myself it was probably one of the chairs shifting because the floor was uneven, or maybe the old building was just settling. But the sound was too deliberate. It wasn't a random creak. It was a short, quick scrape that stopped right after it started. When we stepped into the kitchen, everything looked normal. The chairs were pushed in around the small table we used during breaks. Nothing seemed out of place. The refrigerators were all shut. The sink was empty, and the counters were clear. I let out a breath and told Mark it was probably just the floor shifting. We turned around to head back to the front. That's when we heard the laugh. It sounded like someone standing a few feet away, chuckling in a low, raspy tone. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was distinct. It didn't echo through the room. It felt like it was right there next to us. Mark looked at me with his eyes wide, and I felt the hair on my arm stand up. My stomach tightened, and I felt a cold ripple down my back. I couldn't tell if the laughter was male or female, but it sounded mocking, like someone was amused by our confusion. I didn't wait to see if there was anyone else in the room. I just ran. Mark was right behind me. We sprinted toward the front entrance, grabbed our phones, and got outside in about 10 seconds. I could hardly breathe. My chest hurt from the sudden panic. Mark dialed the police right away. I kept looking through the glass door, expecting to see a face or a shadow. But it was just darkness inside with a couple of lights still on. No movement. Nothing else. I thought my heart was going to explode. I'd never heard anything that clear and that close in an empty room. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. 2 officers got out of their squad car and asked us what happened. Mark told them he heard someone laughing inside, and I backed him up. They asked if we were sure nobody else had a key. We said no, only the owner and one of the other managers. Everyone else was gone for the night. The officers went inside, turned on all the lights, and searched every room. They checked every corner, opened every closet, and made sure all the windows were locked. They even looked in the attic space above the kitchen. Nothing. No sign of a break-in, no footprints or anything on the dusty floors in the unused rooms. Everything was locked up tight. They didn't seem angry or dismissive, but I could tell they thought we were just spooked by an odd noise. They told us to lock up and go home, and that we should call them again if anything else happened. The next morning, I felt embarrassed to tell my coworkers what had happened, but we couldn't really hide the story. We all talk a lot at the cafe, and news travels fast among the staff. A few people said they'd heard voices in that hallway before, but most chalked it up to the wind or the old building. One of our baristas, Lisa, said she once heard footsteps in the empty dining area after closing. She was sure she locked the door, but she walked out and found no one there. Another coworker, Tom, claimed he saw a chair move by itself near the storage room. No one believed him at first. After that night, Mark and I started to think maybe Tom wasn't lying. Over the next couple of weeks, Mark and I worked several evening shifts together. We tried to act normal, but every time it got past 9 o'clock, I felt that same tension in my chest. Small things started happening that I couldn't explain. Cups fell off shelves for no apparent reason. It wasn't just 1 or 2 times. It happened enough that we thought there might be an issue with the shelves or the temperature in the room, but nothing seemed wrong. Sometimes, while cleaning up, I'd hear a faint whisper behind me. It sounded like someone speaking softly, but I could never make out words. I'd turn around and no one would be there. There were nights where I felt watched, especially when I was in the pantry alone. The pantry was a narrow space near the hallway, and it always felt colder than the rest of the building. One night, around closing time, I stayed in the office at the back to finish some paperwork. Mark was in the kitchen, cleaning the counters and packing up leftovers. The rest of the staff had left already because it was a slow night. The office door was open, and I could see part of the hallway if I leaned back in my chair. I was trying to focus on the numbers in front of me, but I kept looking up because I felt jumpy. A few minutes later, I heard a faint tap on the wall outside the office. It didn't sound like pipes or random creaking. It sounded like someone tapped their knuckles on the wooden panel once, then paused, then tapped again. I stood up and walked to the doorway. I looked left, then right. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The light was on, but it was dim because the fixture was old. The shadows in the corners looked darker than usual. My pulse sped up. I called out, "Mark?" No answer. I called again, louder. Still no response. I took a few steps down the hallway until I reached the corner that led to the storage room. The door was closed, but I could hear a slight rustling sound inside. I grabbed the doorknob carefully and twisted it. The door was locked. We never usually locked that door because we used it during the day. I knocked on it, feeling stupid, but I needed to see if Mark was somehow in there. No one answered. The rustling stopped, I was about to turn around when I heard Mark's voice behind me. He was coming from the kitchen area, asking me why I was calling him. I almost jumped out of my skin. I spun around and yelled at him to come with me. We tried to open the storage room door again. Still locked. We checked our keys, but none of them worked on that door. We never actually locked it, so we didn't even know which key fit. Mark said he hadn't touched that door all night. We stood there for a few seconds trying to figure out what was going on, when suddenly the door handle rattled by itself. We both heard it. It was a quick metallic sound like someone trying to open the door from the inside. My stomach flipped and my hands shook. Mark's face went pale. He grabbed my arm and pulled me back a bit. We stared at the doorknob, expecting it to turn. Then everything went quiet. Mark reached out and tried the handle again, but it was stuck. We felt too scared to hang around, so we left that hallway and went back to the front. We turned off as many lights as we needed to and locked the main door. I had trouble sleeping that night. I kept hearing that rattle in my head. A few days later, I brought up these experiences to the manager, Sarah. She told me some staff members quit in the past because they felt uncomfortable in the building. She also said the owner wouldn't talk about it, but she suspected something was off with the property's history. Mark thought we should do some research on the place. We tried to look up old records online. We found references to a family that lived there in the late 1800s, but there wasn't anything specific about crimes or tragedies. We didn't see any articles about accidents or anything that might explain strange occurrences. We did find a local blog where someone claimed the house was built on the foundation of an even older structure, but there were no clear details. At work, things kept happening, but never when it was busy. Usually it was quiet moments when we were closing up or when someone was alone in one of the back rooms. I started to notice that the strange events seemed more common near the hallway by the kitchen. That corridor led to the storage room, the pantry, and 2 other rooms we hardly used. A lot of the staff avoided going there alone. Lisa asked me to walk with her anytime she needed to get supplies from that area. She said she felt like someone was looking over her shoulder every time she passed that hallway. One evening, Mark and I decided to stay after hours again, not because we wanted to, but because we had to do a thorough inventory. We tried to stick together. We walked around with a clipboard, counting items and writing them down. The building was silent. The lights were off in the dining area, but we left a few overhead lights on in the kitchen and corridor so we wouldn't have to fumble in the dark. My heart rate stayed high the entire time. I kept expecting to hear that laugh again or the tapping on the walls. Mark was jittery too. He kept looking around corners like he was expecting to see someone. We finished counting the supplies, and everything was more or less fine. We were about to walk back to the front when we heard a muffled voice near the pantry. I froze in place. Mark froze too. It sounded like a single word, but I couldn't make it out. It was low and grumbling, almost like someone talking under their breath. I took a step forward and the sound stopped. I pushed the pantry door open. The pantry was dark, but I flicked on the small light inside. The shelves were full of canned goods, coffee beans, sugar containers, and other supplies. Nothing was out of place. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything. Mark stepped in behind me, staying close. We stood there for a few seconds, feeling our own breathing and listening for any movement. Nothing happened. We turned to leave and something brushed against my leg. It felt like a slight push or a pull on my pants. I yelped and jumped forward, practically colliding with Mark. He grabbed my arm, and we both stumbled. I spun around, shining my phone's flashlight on the floor. There was nothing there. Mark whispered, asking if I was okay. I told him something touched my leg. He believed me because he saw me jump, and he felt my reaction. We decided we had enough for the night. We locked up and left. That was around midnight. Things like that kept happening every few days. Sometimes a colleague reported hearing a voice. Sometimes something small would move or fall. We never figured out a logical explanation. I still worked there because I needed the paycheck and I liked my coworkers despite the weird tension. Mark stayed too, maybe because he was just as curious as he was scared. We talked about quitting sometimes, but we were both stubborn enough to keep going, at least for a while. I'm still working at that cafe right now. The building hasn't changed, and neither have the strange occurrences. The owner refuses to acknowledge it. Some nights are quiet and nothing unusual happens. Other nights doors lock by themselves, voices echo in empty rooms, and we hear that faint laugh coming from the corridor. I've learned to deal with the fear by staying alert and sticking with Mark when I can, but I still feel a knot in my stomach every time I walk into that hallway after closing. My muscles tense up and my mouth goes dry. Sometimes my hands tremble and I get chills along my arms. I have no idea if there's an explanation. I don't know if it's some prank, an echo of the house's past, or something else. All I know is that when I hear those sounds or feel that cold touch on my skin, I can't find a rational reason. Neither can Mark or any of my coworkers. We lock the doors, count the cash, and try to get out as soon as possible. We don't linger in the back rooms or investigate noises in the dark if we can avoid it. That's how we manage now, by moving fast and staying aware. I still remember that sinister laugh echoing in the kitchen, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. It's burned into my memory, reminding me that some places hold secrets you can't fully explain no matter how hard you look. And every time I hear a strange sound in that old house, I wonder if I'll ever feel completely safe inside those walls. I still remember the way my heart pounded late at night in that massive old house. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak. My parents were usually asleep, and the hallways felt endless. The house belonged to my family for several generations, but that never made it any less unsettling. Every night something happened that I couldn't explain. Sometimes it was a whisper behind the walls. Other times it was a single, solid thump in the basement. My chest would tighten and I'd clench my jaw. I wanted to believe it was just the wind or the pipes, but deep down I knew it wasn't so simple. I grew up in that place on the outskirts of town. It was large and had 2 floors plus an old attic. The front door was heavy wood, and it creaked every time someone opened or closed it. The windows were tall and narrow, with old-fashioned frames that let in drafts. On chilly nights, I felt the cold air sliding across the floors. My dad tried to seal some of the windows, but no matter what he did, there was always this faint breeze moving through the hallways. The living room was near the front door. It had a long sofa and a coffee table with chipped edges. The wallpaper looked faded, yellowish near the corners. A single overhead light lit the room, casting weak shadows that made every corner seem darker. The hallway led to a dining room. The dining room had a big wooden table and a dusty chandelier that swung slightly when the wind picked up outside. From the dining room, you could walk straight into the kitchen, which was surprisingly large. My family kept all sorts of old utensils, pans, and pots around. The walls had open shelves, and the cabinets were made of dark wood. The floor was ceramic tile, and whenever someone walked on it, you could hear the tapping of shoes echoing. The back door led to a small yard with a single tree and a rusted gate. Beyond that gate was just a stretch of land covered in wild grass. Above the kitchen was my bedroom, directly on the second floor. Every time something fell or a door slammed below, I heard it loud and clear through my floor. My bed faced the window, and when the moonlight was bright, I could see the outline of the yard outside. The rest of the second floor was a series of long corridors with a few extra rooms and the only bathroom on that level. The doors didn't always close properly. They would shift if there was a sudden draft, and sometimes I'd find them open in the morning without remembering leaving them that way. Those late-night sounds were the worst. I'd hear footsteps on the stairs. The steps were old wood, and they would groan under the weight of anyone climbing them. Usually I recognized my parents' footsteps. My dad's were heavier and my mom's were a bit quicker, but sometimes, late at night, I heard a different rhythm. The boards squeaked slowly, as though someone was taking careful, deliberate steps. I'd hold my breath and wait for them to stop. Sometimes they never did. They would start on the first step, then climb halfway, pause, and continue. I never heard a door open. I never heard any voice or cough afterward. It was just step after step, then silence. The whispers in the walls were another thing. I'd be sitting in the living room, maybe trying to read or watch TV, and I'd sense a faint noise. It sounded like someone was talking, but not in full words. It was like a soft, continuous murmur. I'd get up and press my ear to the wall. The sound wouldn't get clearer, but it didn't stop either. It was right there, like it was on the other side of the plaster. Sometimes I'd knock to see if it was just the pipes, but that only made me feel more uneasy. The moment my knuckles touched the wall, I'd get this tingling sensation that spread across my scalp. The basement was down a set of concrete steps behind the kitchen. The door to the basement was in a corner next to the refrigerator, and it had a flimsy lock that barely worked. One night, I heard a loud thump coming from below. It was around 2 or 3 in the morning. I was getting water from the kitchen sink when the noise slammed through the silence. It felt like the entire floor shook under me. My legs tensed, and my hand froze around the glass. I remember the sensation of my heart beating so hard that I thought it might burst. I took a flashlight from the counter and went over to the basement door. I pressed my ear against it. At first, I didn't hear anything. Then I thought I heard a shuffling sound, like something being dragged across the floor. I wanted to open the door and shine the flashlight inside, but I couldn't make myself do it. My palms were sweating, and I could feel the goosebumps on my arms. Eventually, the noise stopped, and I backed away. One of the most disturbing moments was the night I found all the forks on the kitchen floor. I got up around midnight craving a snack. When I turned on the kitchen light, I noticed the drawer where we kept the silverware was open. The drawer itself wasn't pulled out all the way, but it was open enough to see inside. Every single fork was scattered across the tile floor in a neat circle. I felt a jolt of fear, and my stomach cramped. I knew nobody else was awake. I just walked past my parents' room, and I heard my dad snoring. I picked up one fork and checked it. Nothing seemed unusual about it, but seeing them spread out like that made me feel sick. I gathered them all and put them back, but I couldn't shake off the idea that someone or something had opened that drawer and dropped those forks on purpose. I tried to tell my parents about these things, but they said old houses make noises. They said the wind can cause cabinets to open if the hinges are loose. They suggested that maybe I was half asleep when I saw those forks. I knew what I saw, though. I knew what I heard. Most nights I'd lie in bed sweating, listening to those footsteps on the stairs or waiting for the next random noise. When I turned 18, I decided I'd had enough. I packed my clothes in a few boxes and moved out the next day. I didn't say a big goodbye to the house, I just left. I rented a small place in the city with money I saved from weekend jobs. It was cramped, but it felt safer. I didn't hear strange footsteps at night, and the only whispers I heard were the neighbors arguing upstairs. That felt normal. I could deal with that, but I never fully escaped that old house. Sometimes I'd dream about it. I'd see the hallway stretching out in front of me, and I'd hear those floorboards creaking again. In the dream, my legs would feel heavy, like I couldn't move. Then I'd wake up with my heart racing, and I'd be drenched in sweat. I'd stare at the ceiling in my new place, breathing hard. I could almost hear the echo of the whispers in my ears. It would take a few minutes before my heartbeat slowed down enough for me to think clearly. I'd get up, drink some water, and walk around my apartment, touching the walls to remind myself they were solid and normal. A few months after I moved out, I visited my parents for dinner. They still lived there. My mom served a simple meal in the dining room. Everything felt the same. The old chandelier, the worn-out wallpaper, the musty smell. Halfway through the meal, I heard what sounded like someone on the stairs. My mom paused for a second and glanced at me. Then she kept eating, like it was nothing. My dad looked tired, like he had given up trying to fix any of the problems. He said something about the house's age and how repairs never end. I just nodded. After dinner, I sat in the living room for a while, noticing every small sound. The old couch squeaked under me. The wind rattled the window. When a faint whisper-like noise came from the wall, I told myself it might be the wind. That night I left earlier than I planned. I told them I had work in the morning, but the truth was I felt that tension creeping into my spine again. Some nights I had trouble sleeping. I'd wake up and swear I heard a thump in my living room, but when I checked, everything was fine. Eventually I realized I was jumping at any little sound. My fridge made a normal humming noise, and I'd think of the basement door. I'd hear the building's plumbing and remember those whispers. It felt like the memory of that house was clinging to me, even though I was miles away. There were times I'd sit in bed hugging my knees, telling myself that none of it could reach me now. I was in a completely different place. When I was 20, I drove past the house once without going inside. I parked across the street and just stared at it. The front yard was overgrown, and the paint on the exterior looked even more faded. The windows seemed darker, and I noticed that the upstairs curtain was half drawn, like someone was peeking out. I felt a jolt in my stomach. I couldn't see clearly into the window, and I didn't know if it was my imagination. I started to sweat. My hands were gripping the steering wheel, and my arms got tense. I left after a few minutes because I couldn't handle sitting there. I kept having those dreams. Sometimes they were more intense. I'd see myself walking through the hallway upstairs, and I'd hear a door creak open behind me. I'd spin around, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. Then I'd wake up, heart pounding, with my shirt damp from sweat. One night, I dreamed I was in the kitchen again, picking up forks from the floor, one by one. In the dream, the forks felt sticky, and I thought I felt something breathing down my neck. When I woke up, I was panting and had to switch on the lights. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I tried to keep myself busy with work. I took extra shifts. I stayed out late, hanging out with friends. I avoided driving near that old neighborhood, but every time I sat still, the memories came back. I saw the basement door. I heard that drawer sliding open. I felt that unstoppable dread. Sometimes I felt silly because I knew I was safe, yet my body kept reacting like I was still there. Eventually, I talked to my mom. She mentioned that my dad heard strange noises late at night too. She said sometimes he would get up to check, but he never found anything. They considered moving, but they didn't follow through because the house was in our family for so long. I tried not to argue with her. I understood they felt attached to the place, but all I could think was how I'd never want to live there again. Over time, I realized I had to make peace with it somehow. I started telling myself the noises were just old wood and shifting foundations. The whispers were probably wind tunnels inside the walls. The forks on the floor might have been something to do with the drawer's alignment. I tried to rationalize every event, but deep down, there was still a part of me that didn't believe any of that. I remembered the distinct feeling that someone was watching me when I picked up those forks. I recalled the measured footsteps on the stairs, the ones that never led to a door or a voice. The memory of that tension in my chest never fully went away. Sometimes people ask me if I believe in the supernatural. I tell them I'm not sure. I only know what I experienced growing up in that house. I don't dress it up. I don't try to explain it with fancy terms. I just say there were things in that house that made no sense to me, and they scared me in a very real physical way. My hands would shake, my mouth would go dry, and my mind would race with questions I couldn't answer. Even now, years later, I wake up from those dreams, and I still think I hear the floor creaking. Sometimes I walk to the kitchen in my apartment and check my silverware drawer, just to make sure everything is in place. I often expect to see all the forks scattered on the floor, but they never are. It's just an empty kitchen, quiet and still. Still, that doesn't stop the sweat from covering my forehead or my stomach from twisting. I take a breath, remind myself I'm far from that house, and go back to bed. In the darkness, my mind drifts back to those corridors, those whispers, and those unexplained footsteps. I try to focus on normal things, like my job or my plans for the week. Eventually, I drift off to sleep again, hoping that I won't dream about that place for a while. I've thought about confronting it. Maybe I could sleep in that house again one night just to prove to myself that the noises are harmless. But every time that idea crosses my mind, my chest tightens. I picture myself lying in that old bedroom, with the wind brushing through the corridors, and I remember the feeling of not being alone, even though I couldn't see anyone. I always decide against it. It's not worth the risk of feeling that fear all over again. My parents still live there. They say the house is too important to abandon. I visit them sometimes during the day, but I never stay after sunset. They don't push me to stay overnight, and I appreciate that. We have dinner, I chat with them in the living room for a while, and then I leave. As I walk to my car, I can feel the house behind me, and it makes the back of my neck prickle. The last thing I want is to hear those stairs creaking again while I'm there. To this day, I can't fully explain everything I experienced. I can only say it happened, and it left a lasting imprint on me. If I close my eyes right now, I can hear that slow, careful tread on the wooden steps. I can see the walls where I heard the whispers. I can smell that musty air in the basement. And I can feel the cold tile under my feet in the kitchen while I stand there, staring at forks lying on the floor. I don't know what any of it means. I just know that the house and its sounds never let go of me. I left when I was 18, and I'm not going back for more than a visit. I respect my parents' choice to stay, but I'm done with that place. It's part of my past, but it still shows up in my dreams. And every time I wake up in my own bed now, I'm grateful to see a quiet room without strange shadows or open drawers. That's all I ever wanted. A life where I can rest at night without listening for the next unexplained noise. Still, those memories stick with me. They always will. I arrived at the cabin with a nervous sense of anticipation. I stood outside its old wooden door and felt the damp air clinging to my clothes. There was a smell of wet leaves in the breeze. The long drive up the hill had been quiet, and the fog never seemed to let up. My hands were still stiff from gripping the steering wheel for so long. I opened the door and stepped inside, letting the darkness swallow me for a moment before I turned on the single overhead light. The cabin had one large living area, a small kitchen, and a narrow staircase leading to a loft. Old wooden furniture sat against the walls. The floorboards creaked under my boots. The place looked abandoned, but it didn't seem like anyone had trashed it. I put my bag down and tested the chairs to make sure they weren't broken. One of them wobbled a bit. The walls were dusty and there was a faint smell of mildew near the windows. I ran a hand along a table surface. My fingers came back gray with dust. I checked the sink in the kitchen corner. The faucet sputtered, but it eventually gave out a thin stream of water. The stove looked outdated, and the cabinets were mostly empty. I saw a few chipped plates and cups. They looked clean enough. I walked across the living area and looked at the staircase. It was steep. Each step made a small popping sound. I reached the loft, which turned out to be a cramped space with a low ceiling. It had a single bed frame without a mattress. There was a separate door near the bed that led to what must have been the attic or some storage area. I tried the door, but it was stuck. I didn't force it. I wasn't here to snoop around. I just wanted some time alone. I went back downstairs, unpacked my sleeping bag, and set it up near the fireplace. There was a pile of firewood to the side. I tested a few pieces and found them dry enough to burn. I spent a few minutes lighting a fire. It crackled and popped, filling the room with a mild heat that felt good on my face. My goal was to spend a few days here without distractions. I liked silence. I liked being alone. I never felt comfortable in busy places. My plan was to rest, maybe go for some walks outside and try to clear my head. I didn't expect anything more than a quiet retreat. The first day passed without much happening. I paced around the cabin, checked the windows for leaks, and gathered my supplies. The fog never lifted outside. When it started getting dark, I lit a few candles I'd brought. The cabin had lanterns, but I wasn't sure if they worked. Candlelight felt simpler to manage. That night, I lay on the floor near the fireplace. The sleeping bag was warm and the fire was still glowing. I kept my ears open for any sounds outside, but I only heard the steady wind and the occasional crack of a branch. After a while, I felt my eyelids getting heavy. I started to drift off. That was when I heard a faint step from above. I opened my eyes. The loft was right above me. I assumed it could be old wood settling. Then I heard it again, a more distinct sound, like someone's foot pressing down on a squeaky board. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. I stared at the ceiling, waiting to see if anything else happened. A few seconds passed. Another step. A slow creak. I swallowed hard. I told myself it was probably the wind or the structure adjusting to the temperature. I stared until my eyes hurt, but nothing else moved. Eventually, I fell asleep out of pure exhaustion. The next morning, I woke up with a stiff neck. The fire was out, and my breath showed in the cold air. I sat up and looked around the cabin. Everything was where I had left it. No footprints on the dust, no signs of forced entry. I tried to shake off my unease. I opened the front door to get some fresh air. The fog outside was still thick, and it hid the top of the trees. Moisture clung to my jacket. The wind carried a slight chill that made my eyes water. I decided to take a short walk around the cabin. The ground felt soft and muddy under my boots. I listened to the wind in the branches, but I didn't hear any birds. It felt like the world had pressed pause around me. When I got back inside, I brewed some coffee on the stove. The flame hissed quietly. I sat at the table and sipped from a chipped mug. The coffee tasted bitter. I thought about the noises I'd heard overnight. Part of me wanted to dismiss them. Another part of me kept replaying them in my mind. After finishing my coffee, I started to clean up the cabin a bit. I wiped some dust off the surfaces. I checked the windows again. The frames felt damp, but they were solid. My plan was to keep myself busy until I felt calmer. That afternoon, I noticed the walls occasionally made soft popping sounds. I assumed it was the wood responding to changes in temperature. The floors creaked if I walked too heavily. But every now and then, I caught a different sound, almost like a quiet sigh or a short exhale coming from the corners of the room. I paused each time. The cabin felt like it had its own breath. My eyes flicked around, but I never saw anything that explained it. I tried to keep my mind on practical tasks. I tested the little radio I had brought, but there was no reception in the area. I ate some canned food and tried to plan a simple dinner for the evening. By the time it got dark, I had built up a decent fire again. I set up my candles and placed them around the room. The soft glow made the shadows dance on the walls. I sat near the fireplace and read an old magazine I found in a drawer. The pages were yellow, and the articles felt outdated. I kept glancing around, waiting for some sign that I wasn't alone. I heard the wind outside. Now and then, the flame in the fireplace crackled and flared. After a while, I stood up and stretched. My eyes felt tired from reading. I decided to go to bed. I unrolled my sleeping bag again. I left a candle burning on a small stool next to me. I knew it wasn't the safest thing, but I wanted some light. My eyelids felt heavy. I started to drift off. Then I felt something shift in the room. The candle's flame flickered. The walls creaked, and I heard a low groan from somewhere above. My heart thumped. I sat up and looked around. The candle went out. I rubbed my eyes, trying to adjust to the darkness. The only light came from the dying embers in the fireplace. I felt a chill run across my arms. The wind outside was rattling the windows, but I sensed something else. My pulse raced. I stood up slowly, one hand on the floor to keep my balance. My breathing got faster and my mouth felt dry. Then I heard a scraping sound from the loft. It reminded me of a chair leg dragged across the floor. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and stared up. The loft was pitch black. I couldn't see anything. I stood there listening. A faint shuffle moved across the floor above me. It sounded like slow, deliberate footsteps. I felt lightheaded, but I forced myself to call out. My voice cracked from tension. I said a short greeting, hoping it was just my imagination. There was no answer. My throat felt tight, and my legs felt unsteady, so I backed away and went back to my sleeping bag. I sat there, wrapped in the bag, staring at the staircase until my eyes got too heavy. I think I fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion again. The following morning, I woke up to the same cold air. My back hurt from sleeping on the floor. I got up and rubbed my arms to get the blood flowing. I glanced at the stairs and saw nothing strange. The candle on the stool had melted down the side, leaving a puddle of wax. I walked to the fireplace and poked at the ashes. My mind kept recalling that sound from the loft. I wasn't imagining it. I had heard footsteps. I spent the day feeling on edge. I ate some bread and more canned food. I forced myself to walk outside for a while, even though the fog still lingered. The cabin's shape vanished behind me as I explored the hillside. The trees stood close together, their trunks damp and dark. The silence was overwhelming. I saw branches shaking in the wind, and once I heard a distant crack of a falling limb. I kept going until I realized I didn't recognize anything around me. My chest tightened and I hurried back. When I reached the cabin again, I felt a twisted relief to see it, even though it made me uneasy. Late that afternoon, the temperature dropped. I shivered inside my jacket and built a new fire. While I waited for it to catch, I walked around the cabin, checking every corner. I opened cabinets, peeked under the old furniture, and even tried to open the door in the loft again. It was stuck, as if something on the other side was holding it in place. My arms strained as I pushed, but it didn't budge. My hands felt clammy against the doorknob. I let go and stood there, breathing hard. I tried not to think about what might be behind that door. That evening, I lit more candles. I placed one at the foot of the stairs, one on the table, and one near my sleeping bag. I wanted more light to make me feel safer. I sat in front of the fireplace, watching the flames. My mind raced with possibilities. Was there some hidden animal upstairs? Was it an intruder who found a way in? Or was I losing my grip on reality? I stayed awake as long as I could. Around midnight, I noticed the candles flickering. The air felt thicker. My ears picked up a faint whisper of my name, repeated from somewhere close to the walls. My muscles tensed up. I looked around, trying to see if there was a draft. The cabin felt sealed, but the whisper sounded like it brushed past my ear. I stood up so fast that my legs almost gave out. My heart pounded. I said something out loud, but I don't remember my exact words. It might have been me telling whatever was there to leave. Suddenly, the candle by the table went out. The flame near the stairs flickered and died next. The hairs on my arms stood up. I grabbed the last candle and held it close to me. My hand shook, making the flame dance. I heard the floor creak behind me. My stomach dropped, and I whipped around. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I felt a presence moving across the floorboards. My mouth went dry again. I backed up until I hit the wall. My mind screamed at me to run out the front door, but my body refused to move. I stayed there, pressed against the wood. My candle flickered once, then it snuffed out. I stood in complete darkness. My breathing felt loud. My heart beat against my ribs. The room felt alive, with soft clicks and creaks all around me. I thought I heard faint breathing that wasn't mine. I reached out blindly and touched the back of the chair. I gripped it, trying to keep my balance. After a moment, I fumbled in my pocket and found a lighter. I flicked it a few times until a small flame appeared. It pushed back the darkness just enough for me to see a few feet in front of me. I stumbled toward the fireplace and managed to place a bit of kindling on the embers. After a few tries, I got a small flame going. I knelt there, keeping the lighter in my hand. My entire body was tense. I listened for any footsteps. The crackle of the fire grew, giving me a bit more light in the room. I waited, straining to hear something. A minute passed, then another. The presence felt close, but I couldn't see anything. My face was damp with sweat, even though the air was cold. Finally, the room felt a bit calmer. The soft glow of the fire lit the area around me. I stood up, my knees shaking, and looked at the stairs. They were empty. I looked at the door. It was still closed. I wiped my forehead and tried to get my breathing under control. My hands were clammy. I picked up my flashlight from near my sleeping bag and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness. I pointed it at the floor, then at the walls. I saw nothing out of place, no footprints, no marks. My teeth chattered from the cold, but I knew it might also be from fear. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back to the fireplace, flashlight in one hand, lighter in the other. Now and then, the flames dipped, and I had to add more wood. My nerves were raw. Every small sound made me jump. I felt a constant tightness in my chest. The whispering continued off and on. but never clear enough to make out real words. It sounded like people calling my name from far away, sometimes from behind the walls, sometimes from above. My scalp tingled with every new whisper. I tried to focus on the heat of the fire and the smell of burning wood to stay grounded. When morning arrived, I felt a weak relief. The gray light outside pushed through the windows and the inside of the cabin became visible. I forced myself to eat a little. My stomach churned and I had trouble swallowing. My hands were shaking too much to hold the mug steady. I knew I had to make a decision. Part of me wanted to leave right away. Another part of me felt stuck, like the cabin was challenging me. But I kept remembering that I came here for peace, not for this. I decided to pack my things. I folded my sleeping bag, gathered my candles, and cleaned up any trash. The cabin felt like it was watching me. My neck prickled, and I fought the urge to keep looking over my shoulder. I felt that if I stayed longer, I might lose my grip on reality. The sense of something moving behind the walls never left me. I went outside and loaded my car. The air was cold and wet. The fog was still thick, clinging to the hill. I closed the trunk and looked back at the cabin. The old wood and fog blended together, making it hard to see details. I got in the driver's seat and started the engine. I felt a sudden rush of anxiety, like I was making a final decision about something important. My pulse quickened, and sweat formed on my temples. Then I backed the car away, heading down the slope. As I drove off, I tried to keep my eyes on the path. The wind picked up, and the fog moved across the road in swirls. I checked the rearview mirror once. I saw the vague outline of the cabin's roof disappearing into the mist. My mouth felt dry and my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I pushed forward, determined to put distance between me and that place. I didn't hear voices anymore, but my heart still pounded. I felt uneasy, like the cabin's presence was just behind the next bend in the road. I kept driving until I was far enough down the hill that the air cleared. The fog thinned out. I could see patches of sky. My muscles started to relax and I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. My breathing steadied. I realized I hadn't blinked much. I took a few slow breaths and focused on the road. By the time I reached the main highway, I could feel my hands again. They weren't so numb. A tired ache spread through my whole body and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. I promised myself I wouldn't return to that cabin. I didn't want any more nights of footsteps in the loft. I didn't want to hear whispered names in the walls. I didn't want to sense that silent figure pacing across the floor. The retreat I'd hoped for never happened. Instead, the cabin seemed to reach out and pull me into a deeper tension than I'd ever known. Even now, I can still picture those dark corners and hear the sound of boards creaking above my head. I don't think I'll ever forget that feeling of a presence standing behind me in the dark, studying my every move. The cabin let me go physically, but I still feel it in the back of my mind, like it's waiting for me to return. I don't plan on giving it that chance. I got the mirror on a Tuesday. It came in a wooden crate with my last name stamped on it. I opened it in my living room, under a dull ceiling lamp, expecting a normal piece of furniture. Instead, I saw a tall mirror with dark wooden frames carved into twisted faces. I felt my stomach drop. The details on those faces looked too real. Their mouths and eyes were pulled in strange angles. Their cheeks seemed hollow. I ran my fingertips over one of them and felt the deep grooves in the wood. My pulse sped up because it felt wrong, but I couldn't look away. I carried the mirror into my bedroom because I needed to hang it somewhere. I didn't want it in the hallway where a guest might see it. I didn't know who would ever want to see something like that. At the same time, it was part of my inheritance. I'm not sure why I didn't just throw it in the garage. Something about it made me think I should respect the memory of whoever passed it down. I hung it on the wall facing my bed. That first night, I tried to ignore it. I turned off the lights. I closed my eyes, but I felt its presence. I rolled over and stared at the dark outline of it. The carved faces looked like they were in pain. I told myself it was just my nerves. Maybe I was stressed out from work. Maybe I was spooked by old legends about haunted objects, but I couldn't sleep. I got up around midnight and turned on the lamp on my nightstand. The mirror glinted in the weak light. I stood in front of it and looked at my reflection. At first I saw myself. My hair was messy. My eyes looked tired. My pajamas were wrinkled. I lifted my hand to scratch my head, and that's when I noticed a small delay. My reflection raised its hand half a second later. I froze. My heart pounded. I tried again. I lifted my other hand, and this time, my reflection almost matched me, but it felt off. It moved smoothly, but the timing wasn't right. I thought I was imagining it. I leaned in closer. I stared into my own eyes in the mirror. I couldn't see anything strange in my face at first, but my eyelids twitched. I blinked, and then I saw a shadow behind me in the reflection. My bedroom was small, so nobody should be able to stand behind me without me noticing. But I saw a dark shape pass near the bottom edge of the mirror. I spun around, but the room was empty. My arms felt cold and my throat felt tight. I turned off the lamp and tried to sleep again. My dreams were full of dark hallways and silhouettes. I heard faint whispers that night, but I'm not sure if I was dreaming or if they were real. The next morning, I got ready for work. I kept my eyes on the mirror while I pulled on my pants and shirt. I didn't see anything abnormal at first. My reflection seemed to move in time with me. I checked the carved faces on the frame, and they looked the same as they did the night before. Twisted, grimacing. I shrugged and told myself I'd been tired. Maybe I misread the reflection. I left for work and stayed out of the house until after dinner. That evening, I went back to my bedroom. I sat on my bed and looked at the mirror. I could see the reflection of my closet behind me. I could see my nightstand and the lamp. Everything looked normal. I touched the surface of the mirror. It felt cold. The wood around the glass felt smooth in some places, rough in others. I didn't see anything move, so I thought maybe I had spooked myself for no reason. I brushed my teeth and changed into my pajamas. I walked back in and saw that the reflection was a step behind me again. I realized it when I reached to turn off my lamp. My reflection still had its hand at waist level for a split second. Then it caught up. My heart thumped. I inhaled through my nose and felt my chest tighten. I flicked the lamp off and climbed into bed without looking in the mirror. I lay there, staring at the ceiling. My bedroom was dark, but I could still see the outline of that mirror. The silence felt heavy. My bed creaked every time I shifted. I tried to close my eyes, but then I heard a soft, scraping sound. It came from the corner of the room. My stomach flipped, and I broke into a sweat. I told myself it was the old house settling, or maybe a branch against the window, but it came from near the mirror. I didn't want to check. I forced myself to turn my head. In the light from the street lamp outside, I could see the glass surface of the mirror. Something moved behind the reflection of my bed. I saw a faint outline of a shape. It looked tall. It stood behind the reflection of my bed, but it didn't appear in the real room. I froze. My breathing got shaky. I watched that shape slide to one side of the mirror, and then it disappeared. I jumped out of bed and switched on the overhead light. I stared at the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, matching my movements for a few seconds. Then I noticed my reflection's lips parted a moment after I opened my mouth to breathe. That half-second delay felt impossible to dismiss. I didn't know what to do. I felt my skin crawl. I left my bedroom and spent the night on the couch. The next day I woke up with a stiff neck. I tried not to think about the mirror while I ate breakfast. I wanted to leave for work as soon as possible. I needed to get away from that thing, but I had to at least check it. I stood in front of the doorway to my bedroom and looked at it from a distance. In daylight, it seemed like an ordinary antique, except for the twisted faces on the frame. I walked in slowly and saw my reflection approach in the mirror. My reflection matched me this time. I waved. It waved. I jumped in place. It jumped with me. I felt relieved, but I stayed cautious. I pressed my hand against the glass. It felt smooth and cold. Nothing unusual happened. I headed to work and stayed there until late. I thought about leaving a lamp on in my room, but I didn't want to waste electricity. Besides, I felt silly taking precautions against an inanimate object. That night, I returned home. My bedroom felt still. I turned on my nightstand lamp and stared at the mirror from my bed. I waited to see if anything moved. It stayed quiet. I yawned. My nerves were fried, but I was exhausted. Eventually, I fell asleep with the light on. A few hours later, I woke to darkness. The lamp had burned out. I blinked a few times. My room was pitch black. A strange smell lingered in the air, like old wood and dusty cloth. I couldn't remember if my lamp had flickered before it went out. I reached for the switch. The lamp wouldn't turn back on. The house felt silent. I heard my pulse in my ears. Then I saw a faint glow coming from the mirror. The edges of the glass had a dull shine, like the reflection of a candle. I sat up and tried to focus on it. My eyes adjusted to the dark and I saw shapes in the mirror. They weren't reflections of my room. They looked like silhouettes of people standing in a line. They were tall and had vague features. Their eyes were just dark spots. Their bodies looked like black outlines. My heart drummed in my chest. I slid my feet off the side of the bed, ready to run. The silhouettes started to move in the mirror. I heard a faint scratching or scraping sound. I saw them shift closer as if they were pressing their hands against the inside of the mirror. I felt a chill creep over my shoulders. I stood up. My knees felt shaky, but I forced myself to walk toward the door. Then I heard a rustling noise behind me. I couldn't bring myself to look at the mirror again. I went out to the hallway, flipped the light switch, and let out a breath when the hallway light turned on. I peeked back into the bedroom. The mirror looked normal in the glow from the hall, but my lamp was still off. I reached in and pressed the switch. Nothing happened. I grabbed a spare light bulb from the kitchen and replaced the old one. The lamp worked again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the living room couch with all the lights on. My mind raced with questions. I felt clammy. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I told myself that if I was still seeing strange things tomorrow, I'd pack the mirror up. It wasn't worth my peace of mind. The next evening, I carried a toolbox into the bedroom. I planned to remove the mirror from the wall. As soon as I touched the frame, I felt a vibration under my fingers. It wasn't strong, but it was there. I yanked my hands away. My heart pounded. I forced myself to try again. I slid the top part of the mirror out of the bracket. The mirror was heavier than I expected. I had to grip both sides. The carved faces seemed to dig into my palms. I pushed and lifted until the mirror came off the wall. I leaned it carefully against the floor. That's when I noticed something in the reflection. It wasn't the room behind me. It looked like a hallway with stone walls. It flickered in and out. I stared at it. I felt an urge to run, but I stayed still. I saw movement in that hallway. A tall figure approached the glass from the other side. It had a hood or something covering its head. I couldn't see its face. I felt my stomach churn. My breath came out in short bursts. I let go of the mirror, and it almost fell forward. The figure reached out in the reflection, and I heard a faint thump from inside the glass. I felt a jolt of panic. I slid the mirror back against the wall, face down. The reflection disappeared under the wooden backing. I stood there, heart hammering, unsure what to do next. I rubbed my arms to calm myself down. I walked out of the room. I closed the door behind me. I stayed away from that room for about an hour. I paced in the hallway holding my phone, thinking I should call someone. But who? I couldn't exactly tell them I had a mirror that showed strange silhouettes. I decided to go back in and cover the mirror with something. I carried an old blanket inside. The mirror was still face down on the floor. It looked ordinary. My stomach was in knots, but I lifted the mirror just enough to drape the blanket over it. I rested it back against the wall, covered entirely by the blanket. I listened for any sounds. Everything was quiet. I felt relief for a moment. I turned to leave, but then I saw a slight movement under the blanket. It looked like a ripple. I held my breath. I didn't wait to see more. I ran out of the room and closed the door. That night I heard soft tapping sounds from behind my bedroom door. I sat on the couch, wide awake, clutching a flashlight. My neck ached from tension. The tapping continued at irregular intervals. I thought about going in there and throwing the mirror out the window, but I didn't have the courage to face whatever was on the other side of that glass. In the morning, I forced myself to act normal. I ate breakfast. I went to work. I couldn't focus on anything. When I came home, I found my bedroom door ajar. I was sure I had closed it. I walked in and saw the blanket on the floor. The mirror stood upright against the wall, uncovered. The carved faces on the frame appeared deeper, like the wood had changed shape. They seemed more pronounced, with greater detail around the eyes and mouths. I got goosebumps on my arms. The air felt heavy. I smelled something stale and damp. I stood in front of the mirror, keeping a few feet of distance. I saw my reflection. I saw my unmade bed in the background. The reflection seemed to match my movements for a few seconds. Then I raised my hand slowly, and my reflection stayed still. It watched me without copying me. My throat felt dry. My hand started to shake. The reflection's eyes narrowed, and I felt a tingling in my chest. It felt like a strong wave of dread. I took a step back. The reflection's face twisted into an angry expression. I heard a low hum or buzz in my ears. Suddenly, I saw one of the carved faces on the frame move. Its wooden mouth opened slightly. I stumbled backward, tripped over my bed frame, and fell onto the mattress. I kept my eyes on the mirror. I heard a scraping noise from inside it, and I saw two shapes appear in the glass. They looked like robed figures standing in a dark corridor. They lifted their arms as if they wanted me to come closer. My whole body felt cold and tense. My chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths. My head felt light. I tried to get up, but my legs shook. I stayed there for a long moment, staring at those shapes. They didn't come out of the mirror, but they stood there beckoning. I thought I heard them calling me, but I couldn't make out words. My mind felt locked up. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move. I pushed off the bed, grabbed my shoes from the floor, and ran out of the room. I slammed the door and rushed to the living room. I had no plan. I stood there, panting, staring at the hallway. I decided I needed to get rid of it. I couldn't throw it in the trash, it was too big. I thought about smashing it, but I was afraid of what might happen if I broke the glass. I also didn't know if that would release something worse. I considered calling a friend to help me move it, but I had no idea how to explain the situation without sounding crazy. For now, I've left it in there. I keep the bedroom door shut at all times. Sometimes I hear thuds and scraping sounds. Sometimes I see flickers of light under the door at night. I sleep on the couch. My back hurts, and I can't stop looking over my shoulder, even in my own living room. I don't know what those shapes in the mirror want from me. I don't know if they're really people or if they're something else. I just know they watch me and I can feel their presence. I don't spend much time at home anymore. I'm planning to rent a storage locker and move the mirror there. I'll wrap it in old sheets or blankets. I'll tie them down with rope. I'll try not to look at the glass when I carry it out. I'm afraid of what I might see. I'm afraid it might try to show me that hallway again. The idea of that corridor makes my skin crawl. I can't explain where it leads or what's on the other side. I only know I feel drawn to it when I see it. I'm telling you this because I need someone to hear it. I'm not looking for sympathy. I just want to warn anyone who inherits an old mirror with carved faces. If you see those contorted expressions, and if you feel that strange chill when you touch the frame, don't keep it. Don't hang it in your bedroom. Find a way to get it away from you. It's not worth the nightmares. It's not worth the way it makes you question your own reflections. I haven't slept well since I brought it here. I feel like it's just waiting for me to give in and walk right through that glass. But I won't. I don't care if it's part of my inheritance. I'd rather face the consequences of getting rid of it than end up trapped in that place. That's my plan for tomorrow. I'll take it to a storage locker, lock it away, and hope it stays there. I just hope it doesn't follow me. I hope I can finally sleep. Right now, I can still hear faint noises from the other room. When I close my eyes, I see those silhouettes in my mind. They want me to come closer, but I won't do it. I won't look in that mirror again. I'd rather live my life on this couch than face those eyes in the glass. That's all there is to it. I wish I had never opened that crate. I wish I had never seen those carved faces or that grimacing wood. But it's too late now, and all I can do is stay as far away as possible. I never thought an old theater would make me feel so exposed. I remember standing in the middle of the stage with the house lights off, only a single work light behind me. I could see rows of ragged seats and dust dancing in the air. My heart was pounding because I felt like someone was watching me. That was my first night in the abandoned theater, and I still get nervous when I think about it. I got the part in a small production that needed a new rehearsal space. My friend told me about this theater that hadn't been used in years. I showed up during the day for our initial check. The foyer had broken windows covered with plywood, and graffiti covered the walls. When I stepped inside, the smell of old carpet, rotting wood, and mildew hit me. I remember coughing a few times because the air felt thick. I looked around and saw broken chairs, torn posters, and a ticket booth with shattered glass. My director and the rest of the group seemed uneasy too, but we were desperate. Rent was cheap and we needed somewhere to practice. That same evening, the director told me I'd have solo sessions there. He wanted me to get comfortable on the stage so I'd show up alone. The first time I arrived by myself, I tried to be brave. I unlocked the heavy door with the old key, pushed it open, and saw the main hallway that led to the auditorium. My footsteps echoed and I noticed the faint smell of something burnt like old wiring. The ceiling was cracked in places and a few light bulbs flickered or stayed off. It felt like I was entering a place that didn't want me there. I walked straight to the auditorium. The stage was huge, with thick red curtains that looked brown from all the dust. I brushed my hand against the fabric, and my fingers came away gray. There was a single spotlight near the stage edge connected to an old electrical rig. I turned it on, and it hummed. At first, the light flickered, then settled on a weak beam. It was just enough to see where I was standing. The silence in that place made me uneasy. I could hear my own breathing and the faint buzz of the light. My skin felt clammy and my stomach was tight, like I was about to give the most important performance of my life. I started reciting lines from the play, hoping to shake off the feeling of being watched. My voice echoed too much, bouncing back at me. That's when I noticed the seats. They seemed to stare at me. The dust was so thick I could see footprints where I walked. I tried to ignore that creepy sensation. After a few lines, I heard something. It sounded like whispering from the back rows. I froze. My mouth went dry, and my heartbeat sounded loud in my ears. I stood there, not moving, just listening. The whispering didn't stop right away. It faded after a few seconds, and I heard a faint sound of something scraping against metal. I took a deep breath, convinced myself it was just the old building settling, and continued rehearsing. But then I heard a voice whisper the exact words I was about to say. It was soft, like a breathy echo. My eyes watered, and I felt a prickle on my neck. I turned around with my script in hand and faced the darkness. I didn't see anyone. A few seats in the back row were broken, and the seat cushions were torn, but nobody was there. I called out, "Hello?" My voice cracked. No one answered. I waited, feeling the hairs on my arms stand on end. I whispered my next line, and I heard that same soft voice repeat it. I didn't want to be there anymore, but I forced myself to keep going, hoping it would pass. After about an hour, I locked up and left. I told the director the next day about the whispering. He laughed it off and said it was probably the wind or my nerves. He insisted I keep going back. We had no other place, and I needed to prepare. So the next evening I arrived around the same time. The sky was dark and the streetlights didn't reach the theater's entrance very well. When I went in, I thought the air felt colder than before. My hands were shaking a little and I felt a chill run through my chest. I tried to calm down, reminding myself it was just an old building. I started warming up on stage. I walked around, stretched, and tried some lines. Within minutes, I heard a door slam backstage. It was loud. and it made me jump. My heart pounded so hard I felt a light thump in my chest. I went to check. The backstage area was a mess of scattered props, some broken furniture and old lighting equipment piled against a wall. I saw a door leading to the dressing rooms. It was closed. I pushed it, and it creaked open. The corridor behind it was dark. One weak light bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering like it was struggling to stay on. I called out, "Is anyone there?" My voice trembled a bit. No answer. I walked down the corridor. My shoes crunched on broken glass. I saw a couple of dressing rooms on each side. I stepped into one and found cracked mirrors, a coat rack, and a bench with missing slats. Makeup containers were scattered on the floor. I saw old wigs on mannequin heads, their hair tangled and dusty. Everything smelled musty, like it hadn't been touched in a long time. When I got to the end of the corridor, there was a door labeled basement. It was locked. I tugged on it, but it wouldn't budge. Then I heard another slam, and I realized it came from the stage area. I hurried back, feeling my pulse in my neck. When I returned to the stage, everything looked normal except for one thing. The spotlight was off, even though I hadn't touched the switch. The auditorium was pitch black, and I had to pull out my phone for light. I made my way to the circuit box near the stage and flipped the spotlight switch. It turned on again. I glanced at the seats, and I felt certain they weren't empty. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt eyes on me. My scalp was tingling, and I was short of breath. I left soon after, deciding I'd had enough for one night. The next day, I arrived earlier. I thought daylight might help. The theater was still dim inside, but at least I saw what was around me. I set up a small lamp on stage to add extra light. I began to rehearse. The strange whispering started again, and this time it felt like it came from the wings. I heard my lines repeated before I could say them. My voice wavered and sweat rolled down my face. I walked off stage to investigate. I pushed aside a heavy curtain and found a small corridor lined with old props. Dust floated around me. I searched for speakers or any device that might be playing recordings. There was nothing. I heard a scuttling noise behind a stack of boxes, and my chest tightened. I walked over, but it was just a rat that squeaked and ran away. I sighed in relief, but that relief vanished when I heard a door slam again. That evening, I mustered the courage to check the basement door. This time, I found it unlocked. I don't know how it changed. I went down a narrow staircase. The temperature dropped with each step. The air smelled like wet concrete. At the bottom, I used my phone's flashlight to see. The basement was large, with stone walls and a low ceiling. I noticed racks full of costumes, all in terrible shape. Some had tears and stains. When I shined my phone on them, I saw they were old-fashioned dresses, suits, and jackets. They looked like someone had ripped them in a fit of anger. There were masks hanging on hooks. Each mask had a twisted expression of pain or fear. The eyes were hollow. My stomach churned and my arms broke out in goosebumps. I touched one mask. The material felt clammy, like it had absorbed moisture over time. I heard a low hum from the far side of the basement. I walked toward it, stepping over broken wooden crates. My foot kicked something metal. It was an old lamp. I kept going until I reached a corner where more costumes were piled. I noticed a broken dressing screen and a mirror propped against the wall. The mirror was dusty, but I saw my reflection. I looked pale and tense, and I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to inhale. When I exhaled, I heard a voice right behind me whisper my name. I spun around and saw nothing. My heart hammered, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. My instincts told me to get out. I turned and hurried upstairs, not even bothering to close the basement door. I reached the main floor and found my lamp on the stage knocked over. The bulb was shattered, I swore under my breath. The auditorium was dark except for a little light coming from the high windows. I heard my voice echo slightly. Then I realized it wasn't an echo. It was that whisper again, saying the lines I had just rehearsed. My hands shook so much I dropped my script. I grabbed it off the floor and started walking toward the exit. My footsteps were loud and fast. Halfway down the aisle, I felt something rush past me, like a cool breeze. I spun around and saw a black shape dart behind a row of seats. My skin went cold and my lungs felt tight. I kept going toward the door. I stepped outside and felt a wave of relief. I leaned against the wall, catching my breath. My pulse raced, and my shirt stuck to my back with sweat. I told myself I needed to bring someone with me next time, but I knew the director wanted me to practice alone. I also knew I had to face it. So the next day, I came back determined to keep my focus on the script and ignore everything else. I went straight to the stage. I stayed near the footlights so I could see the seats clearly. I began my lines. My voice wavered at first, then got steadier. I tried to ignore any noises or movements in the corners of my vision. But I still felt that pressure, like an invisible audience was judging me. When I paused for a breath, I heard faint chanting coming from somewhere in the theater. It sounded like multiple voices talking at once, but I couldn't make out any words. My scalp tingled and I felt dizzy. I tried to continue. My hands shook, and I had to speak louder to hear myself over that distorted chanting. Then it grew louder. It reminded me of a gathering crowd, but it was strange and uneven. The voices rose and fell in a pattern I couldn't understand. I pressed my hands against my ears for a moment and yelled, "Stop!" The chanting died down, and I stood there in the silence, gasping. I decided to check the main corridors, thinking maybe there was someone playing a trick. I walked through the wings, then out to the lobby. The place was empty. The overhead lights buzzed, and broken glass crunched under my feet. My heart was racing, and my skin felt clammy. I walked the perimeter of the lobby, pushing doors to see if anyone was hiding. They were all locked or blocked by debris. That's when I heard footsteps on the stage. Slow, measured steps. My throat went dry. I walked back in, shining my phone's flashlight. Nobody was there, but the footsteps didn't stop immediately. They continued, circling behind the curtains, then faded. I forced myself to keep rehearsing. That's when the doors at the back of the auditorium slammed shut on their own. The noise echoed, making me jump so hard my knees felt weak. I lost track of my lines and just stood there shaking. After a few seconds, I tried to calm down. My breathing was shallow and sweat dripped down my temple. The chanting started again, softer this time, and I felt pressure in my chest. It was as if the theater itself was pushing me to perform. I started reciting my lines again, louder and with more conviction. My voice broke a few times, but I kept going. The chanting grew, and I felt a strange current in the air, like static electricity. My skin prickled, and my hair stood on end. I didn't stop until I finished the entire scene. At the final word, the chanting stopped and the air felt still. I stood there with my fists clenched, my chest rising and falling as I caught my breath. A minute passed, and I heard a faint scraping behind me. I spun around. One of the curtains slowly moved as if someone was hiding behind it. My gut told me to run, but I stepped forward instead. I grabbed the edge of the curtain and pulled it open. Nothing. Just a dusty backstage area and a broken ladder leaning against the wall. I let go, feeling drained and uneasy. Each night after that, I returned. I kept rehearsing, and every time, I felt the tension build. The footsteps, the whispering, the slamming doors, and the chanting never went away. But I noticed something. Whenever I performed with real energy, those noises and movements seemed to intensify. It felt like the theater wanted me to bring the play to life for an audience that wasn't there. My legs shook, and I had a constant headache from the stress, but I didn't back down. On my final night alone before the official rehearsals, I decided to check the basement one more time. I went down the creaking stairs, phone in hand. The costumes hung in disarray, and the masks were still there, staring at nothing. I felt that cold pressure in the air again, and I heard the chanting upstairs echoing through the halls. I lifted one of the masks to see it more clearly. The face was twisted in terror. I could see the lines and cracks in its surface. It felt heavy in my hand, and I noticed fresh claw marks along the edges of the masks around it, like something tried to tear them apart. My heart pounded. I heard a thud behind me. When I turned, a mannequin toppled over. It had no head and its torso was chipped. I flinched, almost dropping the mask. I put it back and hurried upstairs. Back in the main auditorium, the chanting got louder, bouncing off the walls. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I stepped onto the stage and found the spotlight was on, even though I hadn't turned it on. The chanting rose to a peak. I delivered my lines with every bit of energy I had, determined to finish what I started. My arms felt numb, and I almost tripped over a loose board, but I didn't stop. When I reached the last words of my scene, the chanting cut off in an instant. The sudden silence was overwhelming. My ears rang, and I realized I was covered in sweat. I took a step back and looked into the seats. They were still empty, but I felt that presence. It was strong, almost suffocating. I walked off the stage, grabbed my bag, and left the theater without looking back. Outside, I inhaled the cool night air. My hands were shaking, and I had a weird numbness in my cheeks. I locked the door and felt a small sense of relief. I haven't gone back there alone since. We start the group rehearsals soon, but I can't shake the feeling that the theater is waiting for me. My body tenses just thinking about it. I don't know what's there, but I know it wants me to perform. And every time I remember those whispers repeating my lines, I feel that tightness in my gut all over again. It's like the place is hungry for a show, and I'm the only one feeding it. Even now, telling this story, my chest feels heavy. I can still hear that low chanting in the back of my mind. And I swear, if I close my eyes, I can see those masks in the basement staring at me. I never expected a cheap painting from an old bazaar to break my sense of reality, but it did. The day I brought it home was the day everything started feeling wrong. I want to explain exactly what happened, step by step, without fancy words or hidden meanings. I'm not looking for sympathy. I just need to get it out before I lose track of who I am. I saw the painting near the back of a cluttered stall. The seller was an older guy in a wrinkled shirt, barely paying attention to me. The painting leaned against a broken chair. It looked like a formal 19th century portrait of a man in a black suit, standing in front of a background that seemed stormy and gray. But the face was missing. There was just a blank area where the features should have been. I felt a strange pull. I couldn't explain why I wanted it, but I did. I asked the seller how much he wanted for it. He shrugged, looked at me, and said a price so low it felt wrong not to buy it. So I handed over the money and tucked the painting under my arm. At home, I propped the painting against the living room wall on the floor. I didn't have a nail or hook free at the time, and I wasn't sure where to hang it. I remember staring at it for a few minutes, trying to see if there was any outline of eyes, nose, or mouth. It was just blank, like the paint had faded. The man wore a high-collared jacket and had one hand resting against a carved table. The background was full of grayish clouds, but there was no thunder or lightning, just a murky sky. I decided to leave it alone and went to the kitchen to make a quick dinner. That evening, I felt restless. I was on the couch, flipping channels, but my eyes kept drifting to the painting. The blank face bothered me. It felt like I was being watched, even though there weren't any eyes. I turned the painting around to face the wall so I wouldn't have to look at it. I told myself I was just tired from a long day. Later that night, I went to bed. I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling. My apartment was silent except for the hum of the fridge and a faint traffic noise outside. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something. It sounded like someone saying my name, but it was in my own voice. It was a soft whisper coming from the living room. My chest tightened. My mouth felt dry. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might hear it echo in the room. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was a half-dream, but then I heard it again, clear as day. "Hey," it whispered, and it sounded exactly like me. I swung my legs out of bed, feeling the cold floor under my feet. The hallway light was off, so I flipped it on. I walked toward the living room, holding my breath. I reached the doorway and looked around. The painting was still there, facing the wall. No one else was in the room. The air felt heavy, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. My arms and neck broke out in goosebumps. I approached the painting and heard a faint rustle, like fabric shifting. I can't explain it. but I had the urge to turn the painting back around and see if anything had changed. I kept telling myself it was stupid to feel nervous about some old canvas. My hand trembled a bit as I grabbed the wooden frame and spun it to face me. It was the same image of the man in the old-fashioned suit, but now I noticed a slight trace of a jawline. The blank area for the face wasn't entirely smooth anymore. It looked like there was a vague shape there, as if somebody had started sketching outlines of cheeks or the curve of a chin. I felt a drop of sweat roll down my temple. I reached out to touch the surface, to see if maybe the paint was cracking or if there was a hidden layer. The texture felt uneven, like lumps under the paint. I pulled my hand back and stood there trying to control my breathing. I didn't hear any more whispers, but I couldn't stay in that room. I backed away and went to my bedroom. I shut the door, locked it, and got back into bed. Sleep finally came, but it felt thin and restless. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I went to check the painting right away. I half expected to see nothing unusual. But when I looked closely, I saw more details forming around the face. It wasn't complete, but there was a partial outline of cheekbones and a faint shadow where eyes would be. I felt a rush of cold move through my chest. My mind raced. Paintings don't just grow features overnight. I thought maybe I was imagining it, so I took a photo with my phone. I compared that photo with one I had taken the previous day when I first got it. The difference was obvious. The new photo showed some definition where yesterday's was blank. I tried to eat breakfast, but I barely managed to swallow a few bites of cereal. I didn't want to stay in my apartment, so I left for work. The entire day I felt jumpy. My coworker asked me if I was feeling sick because I wasn't talking much. I shrugged and said I was fine. I kept checking the time, dreading going back home. But I had nowhere else to go, so after work, I headed back to my place. When I walked in, the living room felt stale. There was an odd smell like old wood and damp fabric. I approached the painting again, feeling a lump in my throat. I listened for any sounds. Nothing. But when I turned on the lamp, I froze. The blank face now had the suggestion of eyes. They weren't painted in fully, but I could see hollows in the right spots. The line of the eyebrows was faint. My skin felt clammy, and I found myself rubbing my arms to get rid of the prickling sensation. I stepped back and told myself to calm down. I had the idea of locking the painting in a closet. I felt like I had to do something. So I carried it to a small storage closet near the bathroom. I put it inside and shut the door. I even dragged a small dresser in front of the door, like I was trying to seal it away. I thought that might give me some peace. The rest of the evening I tried to watch TV and pretend the painting wasn't there, but I kept hearing my own voice in the back of my mind, calling me toward the closet. Around midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up from the couch and walked to the closet. I pressed my ear against the door. I heard a soft whisper again. It said my name, plain and clear, but in my own tone. My hands felt shaky. My stomach churned. I moved the dresser aside, opened the closet, and pulled out the painting. The face looked more defined. The shape of the eyes and nose reminded me of my own reflection, but it wasn't an exact match. The hairline was similar to mine. The jawline was close to mine, too. I dropped the painting and it hit the floor with a dull thud. I stood there, breathing fast. I didn't want it in my home. I thought about throwing it out. But I remembered the old man who sold it to me, how easy it had been to buy it. It felt like there was something attached to it, and I was worried that tossing it out wouldn't solve anything. Still, I couldn't keep it in the middle of my living room. I leaned it against the hallway wall face in so I wouldn't have to see it. Then I went to bed, but I left the lights on in every room. I didn't sleep well. I woke up every couple of hours, certain I heard soft footsteps. My shirt was damp with sweat. My mouth felt sour and dry. Over the next few days, the painting's face took on clearer features. Every time I saw it, it looked more like me. By the fourth day, there was no doubt. The painting's facial structure matched mine. The eyes had a similar color, though still a bit dull. The lips were shaped the same as mine. Even the hair was styled similarly. Each time I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I felt unsettled. My own eyes looked tired, like I was seeing a stranger. The whispers didn't stop. Sometimes during the day I'd hear my name in my own voice, right in my ear, even though nobody else was around. I'd spin around looking for the source. Once, in the middle of the afternoon, I dropped a stack of plates in the kitchen because the whisper felt like it came from behind me. The crash startled me so much that I nearly fell. I picked up the shards, my hands shaking. I could see my own reflection in the glossy pieces. I found myself looking for any difference in my face, like it might be fading from me and ending up in the painting. At night, I couldn't relax. I'd lie in bed, listening to every creak and tap in the apartment. I kept thinking I heard footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes I'd get up and stand at the bedroom doorway, staring at the dark shape of the painting on the floor. I felt like it was drawing something out of me. My arms would feel numb. My chest felt heavy. I'd keep swallowing to clear the dryness from my throat. My mind spun with the thought that maybe I was losing it. But then I'd look at the painting in the daylight, and it was there, with my features. This wasn't just stress. One night I decided I had to confront it. I turned on every light. I stood the painting up on a chair. I studied it carefully. I ran my fingers over the surface of the paint. It felt warm, like someone's skin. My stomach flipped. My breathing turned shallow. I saw small details that matched my own face. A faint scar I had on my forehead, the curve of my ear. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to slow my heartbeat. I spoke out loud. I said, "What do you want?" I waited. I felt a tingling in my arms and a light pressure in my head. Then I heard the whisper again, but this time it said, "Come closer." I had a sudden panic, and I pushed the painting onto the floor. It landed face up, the corners of the frame digging into the carpet. I stood over it, panting, trying to decide what to do. I grabbed a roll of duct tape from my kitchen drawer and started wrapping it around the frame, sealing it up. I wanted to cover the entire canvas, but I was afraid to touch the face again. My hands shook so much that I could barely tear the tape. I managed to wrap most of it, though some of the face was still visible. I stuffed it into a large garbage bag and dragged it into my bedroom. I know that sounds like a stupid decision, but I didn't want to leave it out in the open. My mind kept telling me that if it could whisper to me from across the apartment, it could probably do it from the bedroom too. But I felt safer locking it in a bag and putting it behind the bed. That night, the whispers turned into a soft chant of my name. I can't describe it any other way. It was like a repeated echo in my own voice coming from all around me. I pressed my hands against my ears. I yelled, "Stop it!" But it kept going. My body was tense. My neck felt stiff. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. Eventually, I passed out on the bed. When I woke up, the chanting was gone. It was early morning, the sun barely lighting the window. I turned over and looked at the bag in the corner. I thought I saw a faint movement inside the bag, like the painting was shifting. I didn't check. I felt sick. My eyes stung, and I realized I had tears rolling down my face. My chest felt tight, and I tried to breathe slowly. I needed to do something drastic. I forced myself to get dressed and carry the painting out to my car. I didn't want neighbors to see me or ask questions, so I waited until I was sure nobody was in the hallway. I heard a faint whisper from inside the bag while I was in the elevator. It made my skin crawl, but I kept going. I drove around aimlessly for about 10 minutes trying to think of the right spot to dump it, but my mind kept racing. I kept imagining that even if I threw it in a dumpster, it would find its way back to me. I ended up driving back home with it. I couldn't bring myself to just toss it. When I walked back into my apartment, I felt a jolt of frustration and fear. My legs felt weak. My mouth was bitter with anxiety. I set the painting on the floor in the living room, still in the bag. I stood there breathing hard. Then I heard my own voice again. It sounded calm. "You're almost ready," it said. I felt dizzy. I dropped to my knees, staring at the bag. I stayed there for a few minutes, clenching and unclenching my fists. I tried to ground myself by focusing on the texture of the carpet under my hands. Finally, I got up and opened the bag. The duct tape was torn in places, as if the canvas had pushed against it. The painting's face was now fully my face. It wasn't an approximation anymore. It looked exactly like me, even the expression was strange and familiar at the same time. I felt a nauseous swirl in my stomach. My head throbbed. I dragged the painting against the wall. My hands felt clammy. My heart thumped in my ears. I could hardly think. My reflection in the glass of a nearby frame looked paler than normal. My eyes seemed dull, like the color was fading. I wiped sweat from my forehead and tried to steady my breathing. I asked myself if I was still me. I looked at the painting's eyes. They seemed sharp and alive. Then I touched my own face, running my fingers across my cheeks. My skin felt colder than usual. That's where I am now, with the painting leaning against the wall, facing me. I'm staring at it as I say all this. Its eyes match mine in color and shape. The suit it's wearing looks formal and old-fashioned. The background still looks gray and cloudy, but there's a shift in the light around the face. It almost looks like the figure could step out of the painting if it wanted to. I feel weak, like something has drained me. My shoulders ache. My skin keeps breaking out in goosebumps. I don't hear the whispers right now, but I sense a strange buzzing in my ears, like faint static. Every few minutes I feel a pull toward the painting, like I'm standing in front of a mirror. I'm scared to move closer. My fear is raw and my thoughts are jumbled. I'm holding on to my identity as tightly as I can, but part of me wonders if I've already lost it. I'm not sure if it's me in the painting or if the painting is somehow stealing my likeness. All I know is that I can't look away. And that's the truth. I moved into this Victorian house 3 days ago. I chose it because I liked the tall ceilings and the carved door frames. The listing photos looked impressive, and the price was reasonable for a place of this size. But on my first night, I felt something strange in the air. There was a stale smell around the hallways, especially near the back staircase. At night, I heard noises that didn't sound like normal house settling. The steps creaked in a slow, uneven rhythm, like someone was moving around when I was in bed trying to sleep. I got up a few times to check, but I never found anyone there. During the day, I explored each room. The main floors were bright enough with sunlight, but the corners were always a bit shadowy. A thick layer of dust coated the windowsills and the baseboards in places I hadn't touched yet. The house had been empty for a while, so I expected some dust and a few spiderwebs. I wasn't prepared for the constant sense of being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder. Sometimes I thought I saw movement at the edge of my vision, but every time I turned my head, I only caught an empty hallway or a piece of furniture covered by a sheet. On the second day, I noticed the attic door. It was at the end of a short corridor on the top floor, behind a heavy wooden door with iron hinges. Large chains were wrapped around the handle, secured with a rusted padlock. The chains looked old and crusty. I tried to budge the lock, but it didn't move. I pressed my ear against the door and heard nothing. Still, I was curious. Why chain it up like that? I tried to look through any cracks in the door, but there weren't any wide enough to see inside. I asked the real estate agent about it in a quick phone call. She told me the previous owners never mentioned the attic. She assumed it just contained junk. That answer didn't satisfy me. That night I found myself staring at the door, running my hand over the chain. I wanted to see what was inside. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that I had a right to investigate every part of the house I now owned. On the third evening, I felt restless. I had just set up my furniture in the living room downstairs. My muscles ached from carrying boxes, but I couldn't relax. I kept drifting upstairs until I was standing in front of the attic door again. I had a crowbar in the trunk of my car. I decided to break that padlock. I didn't think about consequences. I just wanted to know what was in there. I went outside, grabbed the crowbar, and returned to the attic door. My pulse was pounding. It took a few attempts, and my hands shook with the effort. The lock groaned and the chain rattled against the wood. After several tries, the padlock snapped. The chain loosened and I pulled it off. When I turned the doorknob, the wood stuck for a moment like it was swollen from years of moisture. I forced it, and it opened with a loud creak. Inside, a narrow staircase led up into darkness. The overhead light bulb didn't work. I could only see a hint of dusty floor at the top. The smell hit me right away. Old wood, stale air, and something else, like damp cloth. I fumbled for my phone flashlight and aimed it up the steps. The beam caught dust motes floating in the air. I walked slowly, placing each foot carefully. The wood squeaked with every step. My heart thumped in my ears. I felt sweat trickle down my neck. When I reached the top, I scanned the room with the light. Sheets covered a few large shapes. I assumed they were chairs, a dresser, maybe some trunks. Cobwebs draped from the rafters. I noticed strange markings on some of the wooden beams. They looked like symbols carved into the wood, but some were filled in with black paint. Circles, triangles, and odd squiggles that made no sense to me. They seemed random, spaced out across different rafters. I moved the flashlight around and spotted a few books stacked on top of a small table near the far corner. They had thick covers that looked worn and discolored. I walked over to them, lifting the sheet that half covered the table. Dust rose in a small cloud. I coughed and waved it away. The titles on the spines were in languages I didn't recognize. The letters looked sharp and angular, almost jagged. When I touched one of the books, the cover felt rough, like old leather. I didn't open it right away because I heard something. It sounded like a whisper or a murmur. At first, I thought it was a draft coming through some hidden crack in the roof. But then I heard it again. It was a soft, constant sound that felt like it was circling me. I held my breath for a moment. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. I forced myself to breathe normally and listened again. The whispering noise got louder, though it still seemed distant, almost like it was right behind me or just beyond my peripheral vision. I spun around, aimed the light all over the attic. The murmur faded, and all I saw were sheets and dusty beams. I felt a tightness in my chest. My stomach churned. I told myself it was the wind. This attic was probably full of drafts. But the sound didn't resemble normal wind or the creaks of an old house. I took a step forward to check a covered object to my right. It looked like an old armchair. As I pulled the sheet off, I noticed the upholstery was torn. The seat was damp in one corner, like something had spilled there long ago. A faint stain spread across the fabric. I smelled something sour, but I couldn't identify it. The murmuring started again. This time I felt it close to my left ear. I turned so fast that I almost dropped my phone. My mouth went dry. The sound cut off as soon as I faced that direction. My flashlight showed the empty space near the attic door. Nothing was there, but my skin prickled, and the small hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I took a few steps backward toward the center of the attic. I felt dizzy. I realized I was breathing in quick, shallow bursts. I tried to calm down by telling myself there was no one else here, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I stepped toward one of the old trunks under a sheet. I lifted the sheet, kicked the trunk gently, and waited. No sound came from inside. I set my phone on top of it and tried to open the lid. The latch was stiff. I had to tug it several times. It finally popped open, releasing a musty odor that made me gag. Inside, I found more books and loose sheets of paper covered in handwriting that looked rushed and uneven. Some of the pages had drawings of those same symbols I saw on the rafters. Others had paragraphs in those strange letters I couldn't read. I noticed a faint scratching sound behind me, like nails on wood. My scalp tingled and I swung around again, raising the phone to see. The beam fell on the far wall. I saw a large symbol painted in red. It took up most of the plank. It was a circle with a star shape inside it, but the lines were crooked and the paint had dripped down in streaks. The color looked faded, but it still had a dark, blotchy appearance. My throat went tight. I realized I was holding my breath again. My heart pounded so hard that I felt lightheaded. I took a slow step toward the wall with the symbol. The floor groaned under me. The whispering returned, louder now. It sounded like multiple voices speaking at once, all of them faint but urgent. It felt like they were coming from every corner of the attic. I could barely focus on any one spot because the sound seemed to move. My eyes darted around. I felt sweat running down my temples. The entire space seemed darker, even though my flashlight was still on. I pressed my hand against the wall next to the symbol. The wood felt cold. It was colder than the rest of the attic. I felt a slight vibration under my fingertips, like something pulsed through the structure. That made me yank my hand back. I didn't want to touch it anymore. I wiped my palm on my jeans, trying to get rid of the clammy feeling. The murmurs formed a kind of pattern. I heard a low hum, then a quick rise in pitch, then a drop. It repeated over and over. I told myself to leave. I told myself I could come back later with better lighting, maybe with a friend. But I stood there unable to move for a few seconds. My mind was buzzing with curiosity. I wanted to know what these symbols were, what these books said, and why someone had locked this attic so securely. My eyes drifted to the table again. I walked back to the stack of books. I reached out and picked up the one on top. Its cover was stiff. There was a design stamped on it, but it was so worn that I could only see faint outlines. I opened it carefully. The pages were thin and yellowed. They were filled with symbols and short paragraphs in some language I had never seen before. The letters were jagged, but occasionally there were sketches of creatures and faces. Some looked human, and some looked like animals, but they had twisted proportions. As I flipped through, the attic felt suffocating. The air was thick, and I started to sweat more. My vision blurred at the edges, and the whispering shifted into a steady drone. My hands trembled. I had to set the book down on the table before I dropped it. My stomach felt knotted. I swallowed hard and tried to control my breathing. I heard a thump behind me, like something fell on the floor. I whipped around, aiming my phone light. One of the sheets had slipped off a piece of furniture. It was crumpled on the floor now. I hadn't touched it. I stared at the uncovered furniture. It was a tall, narrow cabinet with its door slightly ajar. I didn't want to go near it. My hands felt clammy, and I realized I was clenching the crowbar so hard my knuckles were stiff. I took a step forward and then stopped. My body felt heavy, and my heart was racing. I exhaled and moved one foot at a time until I reached the cabinet. I nudged the door open with the crowbar. Inside, I saw shelves with small jars. Most were empty, covered in layers of dust. One jar had a thick, dark substance. It looked congealed, maybe dried ink or paint. I didn't touch it. I heard the floor creak behind me again. My pulse sped up. I spun around, but I saw only an empty space. The whispering rose in volume, like it was close to my ears. I felt an odd pressure in my head. My vision pulsed for a moment, and I staggered to the side, steadying myself against the cabinet. The door rattled against the crowbar. I kept shining my phone around, but I couldn't find the source of the sound. Then a cold wave rushed over my shoulders like a breeze that came from the rafters. I shivered and felt goosebumps on my arms. My instinct screamed at me to leave that attic. I gritted my teeth, grabbed my phone, and moved toward the stairs. The moment I stepped onto the top stair, the light from my phone flickered. The screen glitched for a second. My heart hammered. I almost slipped, but I caught myself on the banister. I hurried down, nearly tripping on the last step. When I reached the door, I let out a shaky breath. I slammed the attic door behind me and leaned against it. My chest was heaving and sweat dripped down my face. I stared at the hallway walls, trying to calm down. The house was quiet, but I could still feel that dense energy clinging to me. My arms felt weak. My mouth was dry and my mind raced with scattered thoughts. I kept replaying the murmurs in my head. My ears felt like they were still full of that sound. I sank down on the floor, resting my back against the wall. I glanced at the crowbar, then at my phone. My battery was down to 10%. It had been at least half when I went upstairs. I wiped my face with the edge of my shirt. My breathing slowed, but the tension remained in my muscles. I thought about the books, the symbols, and those jars. I wondered if the rusted padlock was meant to keep people out or to keep something inside. I realized I had left the attic door unchained. I thought about putting the chain back on, but the lock was broken. I didn't have a spare. I decided to just close it. But I heard a subtle scraping sound behind the door as I stood. I froze, my hand on the knob. My heartbeat sped up again, and I imagined that symbol on the wall, the whispering voices, the humming. My fingers felt cold and I could hardly swallow. I shut the door firmly. I pressed my ear against it for a few seconds. No clear sounds came from the other side, just a soft crackle like a distant rustling. I walked away, my legs stiff and shaky. I headed downstairs. I switched on every light I passed. I found myself standing in the living room, breathing hard. My thoughts rushed. I wanted to call someone, but what would I say? I looked at my phone. I had a few missed messages from friends asking how the move was going. I couldn't bring myself to explain what had just happened. I felt embarrassed at how rattled I was, but I also felt that raw edge of fear that kept my hands unsteady. I decided to sit on the couch and try to calm down. My eyes flicked up to the ceiling every time I heard a creak. This house made plenty of noise. I knew it was old, and old houses settle. But these sounds felt different. They felt too purposeful, like something shifting weight up there. The memory of those painted symbols made my stomach tighten. I couldn't explain them. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had disturbed something that was better left alone. My heart rate finally dropped after a few minutes, but I still felt a tingling in my arms. I was drenched in sweat, and my shirt clung to my back. I stood and locked all the doors on the main floor even though I was alone. I just felt better knowing they were secured. I checked the windows too. Then I turned off most of the lights and left a small lamp on. I went to my bedroom, shut the door, and stood there in the dim light listening. The house was quiet for the moment. No murmurs, no scraping. My head throbbed with a dull ache, and I wondered how I would sleep tonight. I crawled into bed without changing clothes. My body felt drained. My mind, on the other hand, wouldn't stop replaying the attic scene. I pictured those angular letters, the weird drawings, and that red symbol on the wall. I thought about that humming that seemed to follow me. The tension sat in my chest like a weight. I shifted under the covers, sweating even though the room was cold. After a long while, I drifted into a restless sleep filled with half-formed images of that attic. Every time I saw that symbol in my head, I heard that distant murmuring. When I woke up, I felt stiff and unsettled, but I was determined to check the attic in daylight. I needed some answers. I wasn't sure if I'd find any, but I didn't want that room hanging over me like a threat. I splashed my face with cold water, put on a clean shirt, and walked slowly back up. The door was still closed. My hand hesitated on the knob for a few seconds. My pulse was already racing. I opened the door and stared up the stairs. Light from the hallway gave me a better view, but the upper part of the attic remained dim. The chain lay in a coil at the threshold, rust flakes on the floor. The air smelled stale. I forced myself to put one foot on the first step. I paused, listening. I heard nothing but my own breathing. I felt that pressure again, like the space itself was pressing in on me. My hands felt slick with sweat. I swallowed and climbed a few more steps, my head just about level with the attic floor. Then I stopped. I couldn't see far into the room without a flashlight. My phone's battery was charging downstairs. I pressed my lips together and tried to decide if I should go back and get it. That was when I heard a faint shuffle. It came from near the trunk or the table. It was a quick scrape and then silence. My courage faded. A chill ran down my spine and I felt a knot form in my stomach. I backed down the stairs, shut the door again, and turned away. I decided I wasn't ready to face that attic yet. My breath was shaky, and I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans. I headed back downstairs, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest. Even though I owned this place, I no longer felt in control of it. I had a feeling that something up there wanted attention. It had been waiting a long time, and I was the first person in years to disturb it. I wasn't sure I wanted to find out what would happen if I gave it more time. never planned to share what happened that night, but I don't see a point in hiding it anymore. I walked into our study room feeling normal. I felt a little tired from work and my feet dragged as I climbed the stairs. I remember the hallway lights flickering a bit. It didn't seem like a big deal. I still had a small coffee stain on my shirt from earlier that day, and I hoped nobody would comment on it. I wasn't in the mood for jokes or small talk. I wanted to sit down, check the new materials, and go home before midnight. That's all I had in mind when I opened the door and saw everyone else in a circle around our usual long table. I was the only man in that group. It wasn't planned that way, but that's how it always worked out. There were about 7 women there that evening. Some had notebooks open, a few had small flashlights, others had their phones ready to record anything unusual. Our meetings focused on reading about supernatural experiences and discussing them. Usually nothing wild happened. We just exchanged ideas and took notes. But that night, someone had brought a strange medallion. I'm not sure who came up with the idea to examine it. I think it was Carla, but I'm not positive. The medallion was on the table in front of an old book with a frayed cover. I saw some symbols carved into the metal. They looked rough, like they had been scraped on by hand. It had a dull gold color with dark marks around the edges. The chain was missing, so it was just the circular part. I stood by my chair, and I stared at that medallion for a moment. It didn't shine. It looked more like a piece of battered metal. But something about it made me uneasy. I felt my mouth go dry. I ran my hand through my hair and let out a shallow breath. We all sat down. The room was quiet except for the hum of the overhead light. Someone switched off the main lamp and lit a few candles. That was normal for our group. We liked to create a certain atmosphere when we looked at new objects, especially if they were supposed to be old or linked to folklore. I didn't think much of it. The air felt stale, though. I noticed no one opened a window, and it was a warm evening. I took off my jacket and left it on the back of the chair. Carla explained that she had received the medallion from a friend who collected odd antiques. She said it might be connected to some ritual or something of that sort. She invited us to look at it closely. Everyone took a turn holding it. The metal felt cold when I touched it. That surprised me because the room was warm and I expected it to be at least room temperature. My fingertips tingled, but I assumed it was in my head. I passed it along and tried to relax. We started discussing the markings. One of the women read from the old book. She tried to match the medallion's inscriptions with some references about ancient languages. I heard her say something about runes, but I don't remember the details. While she was talking, I looked around. The candles were flickering more than usual. A draft brushed against my neck, but the windows were all closed. I told myself it was just the air conditioner switching on. Then I noticed I couldn't hear the air conditioner at all. I shifted in my chair. My legs felt restless. The others kept flipping through pages and typing notes on their phones. Then we decided to place the medallion in the center of the table, right on a small cloth. Nobody suggested a seance or anything like that. We never did that kind of thing on purpose. But at some point, we all got quiet. Nobody said a single word, and the silence became heavy. My eyes started to water because I hadn't blinked for a while. I wiped them and looked around. Everyone was staring at the medallion. I heard a faint sound like scratching. It seemed to come from inside the walls. I tried to focus on that noise, but it stopped the moment I noticed it. Then I heard a slow creaking. I assumed the old floorboards were adjusting, or maybe the building's pipes were making random noises. My heart rate picked up for no obvious reason. I felt sweat on my forehead and my palms felt damp. I told myself I was just anxious, but I couldn't ignore the tension in the room. Without warning, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was like a sudden stab right in the center near my sternum. I gasped. My left hand shot up to my chest and I tried to take a deeper breath. The others turned to look at me. One of them asked if I was okay. I nodded, but I didn't speak. It hurt enough to make me grip the edge of the table. My vision blurred for a second and I thought I might pass out. Then it eased, but I still felt pressure there, like something pushing from inside. That's when a thick fog or some kind of dense vapor appeared around the table. It didn't roll in from under the door or from a device, it just seemed to form around us. My eyes stung and the air smelled musty, like damp clothes stored away for too long. I heard gasps from the others. One woman coughed. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak. I placed my hands on the table for support, but my arms began to shake. A deep rumble came from the far corner of the room. I turned my head, but I couldn't see anything clearly. The candles flickered wildly, like a breeze was blowing over them. The shadows on the walls moved in strange patterns. The hair on my arms stood up, and my scalp tingled. Voices rose up around us, but I couldn't tell if they were male or female voices. They spoke in some unfamiliar language. It sounded like chanting or muttering. The syllables were harsh and they echoed in the small room. My chest tightened again. I couldn't breathe properly. My jaw locked, and I felt saliva gathering in my mouth because I couldn't swallow. I tried to form words, but nothing came out. My tongue felt thick. My arms and legs stiffened, and I couldn't move. My back arched slightly, and I lost control of my posture. Panic hit me and my heart pounded so hard that I felt a throbbing in my temples. The others noticed my struggle. I heard someone say my name, but it sounded distant and distorted. One of them tried to shake me by the shoulder. My body didn't budge. I was stuck in place, half standing and half leaning on the table. My eyes locked on the medallion. It started to glow with a faint greenish light. It pulsed in slow waves, each pulse matching the throbbing in my chest. I wanted to scream or at least call for help, but I stayed silent. My throat was tight and I could barely exhale. The chanting got louder. The unknown words rattled in my ears. I felt the vibrations in my chest. I couldn't think straight. All I wanted was to escape that force inside me. I sensed that it was trying to speak through me, forcing its way up from my lungs. I tried to fight it. My shoulders trembled, and I managed to open my mouth just enough to make a choking sound. One of the women backed away and her chair scraped across the floor. Another tried to steady me. She gripped my arm and I could feel her hands shaking too. That broom thickened around the table. The candles flickered so fast that the shadows on the walls looked like frantic shapes dancing and swaying. I heard the floor creak again. My knees buckled, but the force in my chest held me up. My head tilted back. I stared at the ceiling. My eyes watered because I couldn't blink properly. My skin felt clammy and I shivered even though the room was warm. I heard the others calling out instructions to each other. One said to open the window, another said to turn on the lights. Someone else said to put the medallion away. I heard footsteps rushing around. I saw a flash of light from a phone, but it didn't cut through the fog. I heard the overhead switch click, but the room stayed dim. The candle flames were the only source of light besides the medallion's glow. The voices in the air rose to a chaotic pitch. The words overlapped. My ears rang and my pulse kept hammering. I noticed a metallic taste in my mouth. My throat burned as I tried to swallow. My fingertips turned cold, and my arms felt numb. The woman who had her hand on me tried to pull me away from the table. She tugged, but I didn't move. My feet were planted to the floor. My body jerked, but only from the outside force. Inside, I was stuck, like my mind was pressed between panic and confusion. Suddenly, one of the women grabbed the medallion. She wrapped it in the cloth and clutched it to her chest. The moment she did that, the glow faded a bit. The chanting paused, like someone pressed a mute button. The strain in my chest lessened for a second. I gulped for air and stumbled back a bit. She tried to carry the medallion toward the door. That's when a new wave of energy swept across the room. The candles dimmed to faint embers. The thick fog swirled in a spiral toward her. She tripped and fell to her knees, holding the cloth bundle. I felt the pressure return to my chest, but it was weaker this time. I could at least move my arms. I forced myself to stand up straight. My legs felt shaky and my vision was spotty. I saw bright specks in the corners of my eyes. My head pounded. The others tried to help the woman who had fallen. She still clung to the medallion, and her knuckles were white with strain. I took a step forward. My knees threatened to buckle, but I stayed upright. I reached down to help her stand. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. and she looked at me with wide eyes. She was breathing hard and her hair stuck to her forehead. She told me to take the medallion away from her. I hesitated because I didn't want that thing in my hands again, but she begged me. Her voice shook, and I saw genuine terror in her face. I took the cloth bundle. The moment I gripped it, I felt a faint buzzing in my hand. It traveled up my arm, but it wasn't as strong as before. I tightened the cloth so the metal was covered on all sides. I looked at the others. Everyone was pale and sweaty. Some were gulping air. I heard short, panicked breaths around me. The candles still burned, but the flames were small. The chanting had stopped, and only a deep hum remained, like a low vibration in the walls. The fog shifted around, but it started to thin out. I turned toward the door and took another step. My footsteps were heavy. My body ached. It felt like I had just run a mile in the summer heat. I glanced back and saw the others following me. One reached for the doorknob, but the door wouldn't budge. She twisted the knob and pulled, but it stayed shut. She rammed her shoulder into it. It didn't move. I approached the door with the medallion in my hands. The hum in the walls grew louder. I felt a slight vibration under my feet. We all exchanged a look of dread. Nobody spoke. I lifted the cloth bundle and pressed it against my chest. I felt that stabbing pain again, but I gritted my teeth and held the medallion close. Then, without warning, the door flew open by itself. The handle slipped out of her hand and the door swung wide. A rush of cool air poured in from the hallway. The lights in the corridor looked stable. I noticed that the overhead lamp in our room flickered once and then turned on by itself, flooding the space with a harsh glow. The fog seemed to dissolve into the corners. The candles still burned, but their flames were steady now. The humming dropped to a barely audible level, then vanished altogether. We stumbled into the hallway. My heart was racing, and my shirt was damp with sweat. My chest still felt tight, but it was manageable. My arms trembled from the adrenaline. Everyone's voices tumbled over each other. Some asked if we should call for help. Others said we should leave the building. A few insisted we go back and gather our things. I held the medallion. My head buzzed with the memory of that chanting, but it had stopped. I took a few more steps down the hall until I was away from the doorway. I set the cloth bundle on a small metal chair. Then I took a deep breath. The others formed a semicircle around it. I stood there, rubbing my chest, trying to calm my breathing. The hallway air felt cool and clean, compared to the stale, heavy atmosphere in the room. My head pounded and my arms still tingled. Nobody knew what to do with that medallion. Carla approached it carefully. She asked if I was okay to stand, and I nodded. My throat was dry, so my voice came out raspy when I tried to answer. I said I was fine, just shaken. She touched the cloth and peeked inside. The medallion wasn't glowing anymore. It looked dull again, like ordinary metal. A few of the others peeked over her shoulder. They looked relieved, but still frightened. I felt a lump in my stomach, and my hands stayed restless at my sides. I couldn't stop recalling the moment I felt something trying to speak through me. Some of us decided it might be best to seal the medallion away in a protective box, or at least keep it wrapped up. Carla found a plastic container in a nearby closet. She lined it with extra cloth. She slid the medallion inside and snapped the lid shut. The tension in my body eased a bit more after that. I wiped sweat from my face with the back of my hand and exhaled slowly. We moved back into the room to gather our bags and phones. The environment felt different now. The overhead light was on, and the candles seemed ordinary. The air wasn't as thick, and there was no sign of the mist. My legs still felt weak, and I leaned against the table for support. I exchanged a few glances with the others. We didn't know how to explain what happened. We all heard the voices, saw the fog, felt the force, but we didn't have a plan for dealing with it. All we could do was pack up and leave as soon as possible. One by one, we walked out of that room. We left the building together, stepping carefully down the old staircase. Outside, the night air was humid and my shirt clung to my back. We stood by the entrance, huddled together for a moment, catching our breath. I stared at the streetlights and listened to distant traffic. My mind kept playing the sound of those voices. My chest still ached and I felt exhausted. We didn't talk much after that, we just made sure we were all okay. Nobody was bleeding or anything like that. We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet another day to discuss what to do with the medallion. I got in my car and sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel. My hands were shaky, and my stomach felt unsettled. I turned the key in the ignition, took a few deep breaths, and drove home. I didn't look back at the building. That was the night I felt something pushing its way through me, something I couldn't see or understand. My heart still races whenever I think about it. The memory of the thick fog and those voices lingers in my mind. I don't know what the medallion really is or where it came from, and I'm not sure I want to find out. But I can't deny what happened. I felt a presence using me, forcing me to submit to it. That's the truth of it, and I have no fancy words to dress it up. It's just what happened in that room on that strange night, and I remember every second of it.